So, this year's World Championships, pretty crazy, right? So much happened this past week in India, and quite honestly, I don't quite know where to start. I've been thinking how I'm going to frame this episode and manage to talk about as much of it as possible. I'm inevitably probably going to miss some things. So, as always, guys, in the comments section, not only disagree with me or agree with me, not only tell me that I'm an idiot for my predictions, but also anything you think I've missed or haven't mentioned. It happens often, obviously. Please do let me know in the comments section. But I did give the framing of this episode quite some thought, and I thought, well, considering that I made my own prediction video and a preview video, I thought the best way to be able to talk about as many players and pairs as I possibly could is to actually frame it through my predictions, to go over them, see how well I did, how badly I did. Spoiler alert, I didn't do too well, but that's even better because what that means is I get to talk about the players that I predicted. Did they do well? Did they not? Why? Etc. And then the players that actually got through those sections, and then for the most part, they are different to the players that I picked, talk about them. And then that might bring in other matches, other players. And then what I'm going to do at the end, any players that I missed that I think do need mentioning that I can remember, I will obviously talk about them a little bit. There was some quite memorable things that when I looked through my predictions, that I think I want to touch on. And then, of course, at the end, I've written out a number of your fabulous questions that you've sent in. But yes, this is an episode of Beckman's Breakdown, the show where I take a look at the BWF World Tour events at Super 750 and Super 1000, including the majors and the team events. And of course, like you already know, this is about one of the majors, the World Badminton Championships. But before I do talk about any of the action, I think I want to touch the, let's say, monkey in the room. Not the elephant in the room, but, of course, earlier in the year we had the India Open in January, which was held in the exact same venue that these World Championships are in, and there was a lot of controversy coming off of it. The conditions, the fact there was birds getting into the arena and pooping onto the courts, monkeys in the stands that just looked a bit dilapidated, poor training conditions, and just the general air quality. There were a lot of things that were going on, and a lot of people were talking about whether New Delhi or India should be hosting such a major event like the World Championships. In fact, I even released a bite-sized breakdown where I took a section from my breakdowns and made it specifically because I knew that it will get a lot more eyeballs, and it got a lot of attention and a lot of comments, with many people saying that India shouldn't be. But I am very happy to report that from what I could see and from some of the players that I spoke to throughout the tournament, and obviously including things that I've heard online, that the conditions were vastly much more improved. We knew that the air quality at the hall in New Delhi would be much better than it is in January. January is notoriously bad for that area of the world, and in August it is much better. There's a good case that if India want to hold the India Open and they want to hold it there, it might be better to do it this time of year, but that's not always easy. And I think even looking ahead to next year, they are hosting it still early in the year. But in terms of the arena itself, I wrote down some notes from an article that I read, and that was that the organisers refurbished 2,500 seats, renovated 57 of the 66 toilets, and installed double doors at the 16 inner hall entrances. That was designed to stop birds getting in. Ventilator openings were covered and broken windows sealed as also as anti-bird measures. Alongside, there were upgrades to the air conditioning, lighting, cleanliness, security, and entry arrangements. There was also people that I saw, I honestly thought when I first heard this report that it was a joke, but I think it was actually real, that people were hired to make langur calls designed to scare monkeys because they're afraid of them. And something clearly worked, because I didn't see any reports of monkeys enjoying the badminton. Unless someone had a pet monkey and they brought it in. But no, jokes aside, nothing like that. The only wildlife that got in, I think, was bugs. You saw sometimes a lot of players like swatting away, but I've seen that at many events out in Asia. The wildlife, those, especially that sort of wildlife, there's nothing you can do to stop them getting in. I also have to say, I thought visually it looked much better on the broadcast. If you track back to January, it had this kind of like spotlighty look that I wasn't sure if that's how it looked if you were there in person. I did hear from people that were there that it didn't quite look like that when you were there live, but definitely on the broadcast, it looked like players were playing with spotlights on the court. Here, the court was much better lit. Everything just looked fast better. And even when you had those nice panning shots on the broadcast, you could see all the improvements that have been made to the arena. And on top of that, it was really good to see busy crowds, especially towards the latter stages. Lots of young kids. There were lots of close-ups on them, always really supporting. And I think the Indians are quite known for making their own little posters. There was a few for Jill Clark and a few for the others, and obviously for their own players as well. It was overall, I think, a really good event. I don't think there was any question about Indian hospitality. That was never an issue back in January. It was more the stadium and obviously the air pollution and quality. And I think everything was vastly improved, and India can be very proud of the event that they put on. So that was great to see. Let's get back to the main topic at hand, the action on court. And like I said, I'm going to be doing that by going through my predictions. Going to go in the same order, I believe, that I dropped all those prediction videos, which I did the week in the build-up to the Worlds, where I started with the mixed doubles, then the women's doubles. And then we went to the men's doubles, women's singles, and men's singles. That feels like that wasn't the right order. I know I started with the mix, but anyway, the order I've got in my notes, it doesn't really matter. That is just semantics. Right, mixed doubles. And again, like I did with my predictions, I did each quarter. So I basically predicted up until the semi-finals. So first one, mixed doubles overall. I think out of the 4, I only got 1. I also didn't do any dark horses. I completely forgot to do that for the mixed doubles, but I only got 1, and that's the right at the top, and that was Feng and Wang Dongping. They did get to the final, but had to settle for silver, a second silver for Wang Dongping. I felt throughout the tournament it was a very nervy performance for this pair throughout the tournament, but it must be said they have finally got amongst the medals and were able to reach the final. So whilst they were having all these, you could argue, nervy performances, they were still able to come out on the winning side. And in the final, it did look like in that third game, they went in, I think, 11-5 at the change of ends in the third against the French pair, Thom and Delphine Delrue. And then it ended up being like 12-11. And there was a real sense, I think even Jiang and Steen said it, that the Chinese come back, maybe the French should realise what they were about to achieve or could achieve. And the Chinese got themselves back in. But then we saw this, and I saw this in a number of matches. A pair or player would catch up, and I'd be in my notes. Oh, the tide has changed, and then suddenly, whoever had been caught up suddenly burst away again, and that was what happened in the mixed doubles finals. So the French got another good little run. I think when it got to like 15 or 16-11, I believe it was kind of like you felt like that was it. The Chinese, the errors really started to creep in, and the momentum was with the French, and there was kind of a sense that they weren't going to catch up. But a medal is something, a first medal for Feng Yanze. And I think getting to a major final like this does actually help them if you look a little further ahead to next month's Asian Games. I do think that they can, well, I've written in my notes here, maybe they can come back again from this. It's a bit of a stretch to say to come back from getting a silver at the World Championships, but for a pair like that, the world number ones, Wang Dongping is a former Olympic champion. You could probably have an argument that, again, you could see, I think from a lot of people might see this as a bit of a failure, especially as they were the favourites in the final. There was a thing from Steen that said that this pair are known as the Phoenix pair in China, that the bird that goes up in flames and then they rise again from the ashes. So maybe they can do that again, and they have a great chance next month, the Asian Games. But of course, Gicquel and Delrue are not eligible to play. I quite liked their performance. I think it was in the third round against Watanabe and Taguchi, which I felt was an awkward match for them. I even said that in my predictions, that I thought I was even humming and hawing whether to pick Watanabe and Taguchi as my pick for that section, because I felt that the way they'd come into that tournament with 2 back-to-back tournament title runs, and the fact they seemed to be, and the way they performed in the China Open before, I thought they could be a real troublesome pair for Feng Yanze and Wang Dongping, and I thought they played really, really well. I felt Maya Taguchi just doubted herself a little bit too much at the crucial times. And actually, I did make my notes after that match, and I guess you could see this as a prediction that was right. It was certainly one that almost came right a few times. I said I think other pairs might take positives from that match, the one against Taguchi and Watanabe, when they come up against Feng and Huang. And we did see that in the semi-finals when they played Syahnawi and Marwah from Indonesia. They came ever so close to defeating the Chinese pair, just losing 22-20 in the third. Talking of that semi-final, the last thing I'll talk about I'll talk about the final a little bit more when I get later on to obviously talking about Gicquel and Delrue, is that Feng Yanzi, again, I think it was him that was definitely that little bit more nervous throughout. We saw a lot of those big lunges on his left leg, which just seemed to be more pronounced. He's someone that, because he's so tall, he can kind of reach and lean, and I've actually made a note that I think that's sometimes can be a good thing. It's very hard to get it past him, but I felt that sometimes if he gets a little bit nervous, those big steps can be that little bit more pronounced, and they can sometimes come back to him when he's feeling cool and calm and he's just making those little steps just to kind of give himself that little extra reach. I actually think it's a good thing. It suits his game because he doesn't get pulled out of position. I think if he starts to step more, I think you can actually pull him out of position a little bit more because he is so tall. And I also felt that he dipped in and out a little bit when, again, another thing that he's so good, because he's so tall, hard to get over the top. He hasn't got the biggest smash, but when he's playing really well, he's quite good at stepping forward onto the mid-court, which is a tactic in all doubles disciplines, but especially from the male player in mixed. And I felt he just dipped in and out of that in both, in all the matches, actually, that I saw of him play. It must be noted, the last thing when it comes to Wang Dongping, I do think it was a bit of an unfortunate timing. I don't know for certain, but I have a good sense that I think she was struggling with her period throughout this tournament, because I think it was in a semi-final and in the final she had to go out the arena into one of the toilets, and then she came back. You see, she's had a completely full change, so I wouldn't be surprised if it was that. It was good to see that she didn't get done for any sort of time violation. I know that she was very, very quick in and out, and you saw the tournament referee come on, but I felt that was really good that they kind of didn't really make too much of a song and dance about that. But again, I'm not 100% certain, but definitely that's what it came across of me. And we don't know, I know I'm not a female, so I can't really speak on periods, but I know that it affects women in different ways. So obviously we don't know if that's kind of affecting Wang Dongping seriously, or she's one of the fortunate few that it isn't too serious when you have that kind of those period pains. But I do think the last thing is just for her, I think that desire to win just got in the way of her that little bit much, especially in the final. And I think you can see that in the fact that next year might be her last year, because then the year after that is no Worlds because it's the Olympics. And there's big question marks. She'll be, 33, 34 by LA? Will she carry on? I'm sure she'd want to. I'm sure she would love to. But whether her body can is one thing, and two, whether the coaches think, no, really is time that we allow the next generation to have their time in the spotlight. And then obviously they got to consider Feng Yanzi as well, because he's quite a bit younger. Do the coaches want to then put him with a newer, younger partner where they could have another Olympic cycle or two under their belts? But again, I think the positives for them is, one, that they gave me my one solitary point in the mixed doubles predictions, but two, that they did get amongst the medals. That's a huge improvement from the last two World Championships where they fell early to Christiansen and Boje. And talking of the Danish pair, that moves nicely into the next section, the second quarter, because Boje and Christiansen were my pick, and that was because they had such a good year with numerous titles. And of course we can't overlook the highlight within that, which was the two tournaments, the tour around the Singapore and Indonesia Open, where they won both those, the Super 750 and Super 1000 back to back. And I think they also won, I can't remember which one it was. I think it was the Thailand Open they won, and they also did well in the Malaysia Masters. So they had like 4 or 5 weeks on the road where they were just almost unstoppable. They didn't have the best of Japan and China, but I chalked it up to they probably took a break after Indonesia and Singapore, so they weren't really ready. They probably travelled there because they had to. And then I thought, just with that little bit more preparation time and the way they've been playing and had been so consistent, that they seemed like a rather safe bet. Well, I say that, they were actually, if you remember the video, they were a last minute change, because originally I did actually have Tang Chun Man and Se Yung Sweat. And sadly for that pair, they weren't able to play because Tang Chunman posted mere days before the World Championships got away that he had ruptured, that he'd torn his ACL in his knee. And I know that actually I saw today on social media that he's just successfully undergone surgery for that. So the road to recovery begins, and let me just take a moment to wish him a very speedy recovery. I'm sure his partner, Saying Sweat, who's been in that same situation numerous times, will be giving him all the support and advice that she possibly can. But it's a real shame because I absolutely loved the way that those two played in Japan and China. They really looked like they were back in that kind of top groove. In fact, probably the best badminton I'd seen them ever. So yeah, it's a real shame, and it's just always a shame to see any player get injured. But Christiansen and Boje, the pair that they lost to was Yang Po Xuan and Feng, a pair that if I remember rightly, I can't remember every word I said in my prediction videos. I can barely remember what I said yesterday. I did say that they were very dangerous, and they proved that big time. In fact, I was really impressed throughout the whole tournament with Yang Po Xuan. He looked much faster and sharper than I think I'd ever seen him before, and you can see that in the proof that he got to the quarters of the mixed and secured a medal in the men's doubles. But obviously, I'll get to the men's doubles section a little later in the video. I felt that in the mixed between Yang and Hu and Christiansen and Boje, that usually in the area where the Danish pair are so strong, I speak about mixed doubles. I mentioned it earlier about how the man needs to really dominate the mid-court and push forward. I think that is absolutely crucial no matter what the conditions, but especially the conditions in India, which were ever changing. I think it's really important to be able to get onto that because it's so difficult to get away from those situations. If you've got a pair who's getting above the shuttle and hitting it down in mixed and obviously the men's doubles disciplines, it's really hard to get yourself out of that predicament. But I felt that the Danes that were usually so good there, the Chinese Taipei pair, were a little bit better and were also able to counter offer that. I didn't watch a massive amount of their match. I must be brutally honest and upfront with you, but the bits that I saw, every time Christiansen jumped on it, the tiny Taipei pair were able to counter it. And there were so many times where it felt like the Danish pair were completely, pulled out of position, whether they were late here or they were pulled out to the sides. And there were just all these gaps. And Taipei pair on the contrary they never really looked stressed or out of position. And I think that chalks up to the speed, the increase in speed that I felt that Yang Po Xuan proved. The Danes went in hard a lot on the mid-court areas and were countered quite often. It was turned right back on them. That's what I've got in my notes. But Yang Po Xuan and Feng weren't the pair that made it through. In fact, it was an Indonesian pair of Amri Syahnawi and Nita Violina Marwah. For me, one of the biggest surprises of the whole tournament. There's a few, there's probably a handful, and this pair getting in amongst the bronze medals and almost getting into the final has to be one of the biggest. I knew they were good because when I went up to the All England this year, I watched. I didn't get to watch a lot of badminton because I was there for work, but one of the matches I got to saw quite a lot of was their quarter-final against Guo Junhua and Chen Fang Wei, and that was an absolutely fabulous match. But I definitely wasn't expecting them to have pulled off a result like this, a world bronze medal, and like I said, getting ever so close to making it to the final. In that quarter-final, they did beat Yang Po Xuan and Feng, and I was absolutely, honestly, it was Marwah, the female player, that absolutely caught my attention. Her touch, her vision, everything about her game was absolutely fabulous. They were 11-4 down in the first game. The Taipei pair's speed and power that they'd shown in the round before, literally, it was almost like they just jumped straight into the quarterfinal match from there. They just carried on where they left off. But after that point, Marwah's defence, her movements forward, her front court play, her crouch defence that turned defence into attack. Honestly, I couldn't stop singing her praises. I was just there watching it going like, wow, this is absolutely phenomenal. And they were rewarded by getting, obviously, the bronze medal for Indonesia's first medal in the mixed doubles since 2017 when Liliana Natsir and Tantawi Ahmed won gold in Glasgow. And in the semi-final, what a match that was as well. There are a few occasions that I thought they might fade where the Chinese might just show their experience and their world number one ranking, but they didn't. I felt in that the angles and pushes from the Indonesians were really good, but they were also pushing up the court, which actually I think was something much better by Syahnawi. Because in that, if I told you that I watched their match at the All England, and in that match, my one criticism when I was watching him was he sat so deep, he left too much space in the mid-court. He's a powerful guy, not like the biggest smash for someone who's built like a tank, but excellent drop shots. Wow, his control on the drops, his technique on that is superb, and he's powerful and he can kind of cover the court well because he, like I said, he's built like an ox. But I just felt that he sometimes sat a little bit deep, and I'm not sure whether that was just a one-off thing just from that match. But when I watched them at this World Championships, I felt that if it was a one-off, then he was just much better at it, or you've been told as coaches, no, you've got to keep pushing forward. You can't leave too much space there, or it's something that was a weakness and he's really improved on it. Whatever it was just much, much better. It must be said, Marwah, I said I sung her praise in the quarterfinal, and I felt in the semi-final, she took on the Olympic champion, or former Olympic champion, Wang Dongping expertly well, but she did start to look a little bit tired towards the end. Some of her cross-court shots and stuff started to become a little bit more predictable, or she was a little later on than she was in previous rounds, which just made it a little bit easier for Wang Dongping to get on top. What I actually in my notes said I felt it came down to in that match was when it came down to the third, I said here, there's going to be two battles because it's going to be Feng and Marwah, who can get their confidence back. They looked like those were the two that were dipping in and out of that, looking a little bit shaky at times. And then it's also obviously the battle between Wang Dongping and Syahnawi, who can be more of a key player. And obviously the Chinese won. And so you could say that the Chinese came on top in both those battles. There was one moment in the third, I think at 18-19, where Syahnawi had you'd call it a half-court one, but he was charging forward, which gave me the thumbs up. But it was just sometimes you have those moments where your timing, I don't know, the shot just comes at a slightly weird angle, and your timing it didn't quite fall for him right, and I think he didn't make the error, he wasn't able to put it away, and the Chinese countered that, and that obviously gave them 2 match points. The Indonesians were able to save it, but in the end it was the Chinese that came on top. But yeah, one of my best matches of the whole tournament, that semi-final. On the semi-final Saturday, I got up at 6 a.m. because that was the first match on, because I really wanted to watch it. And I watched every single match the whole day, all 10 matches on court. It was a brutally long day. And there were many amazing good matches, some really good ones, but actually that mixed doubles semi-final was one of my favourites. There were some absolute classic rallies in there. But moving on, next prediction was Dechapol Pranuka and Supissara Pesamparan. Sadly, they weren't able to bring me a point, and it's not because they lost, it was because, unfortunately, in their quarterfinal match where they were due to play the eventual winners of Gicquel and Delrue, in the quarters, in the third round match against Shimagami and Hobara, on the final rally, Dechapol slipped, and you could see, it was on the live stream court, and I was watching it, and you could see straight away afterwards, like, he was holding his knee, I was kind of like, I'll be very surprised if he actually plays tomorrow. We might see him heavily taped and give it a go, but clearly it was something a little bit more sinister, and so they sadly withdrew. And I say shame, not because you hate to see players get injured. No one wants to see that, and obviously there's one less match to watch. I think their match against Gicquel and Delrue, those two pairs have played each other in some big finals, some big matches, and they've always produced really good badminton, really good matches. It's a shame that as fans we didn't get to see it, but I also say that because I felt they were playing some really good badminton. I mean, they're always a good pair, it's why I picked them, but I felt compared to what I saw earlier this year or recently, it just seemed to me like Dechapol was moving better, getting himself involved that little bit more, like we know that he can do. And with his huge lateral jumps and his incredibly nice aesthetically looking technique. And I felt Supissara was also looking super solid too, just doing her, when she's doing the best, I think she's just doing that really basic job of the female player, just taking the shuttle early, winning those battles, and just setting up the lifts for her athletic and powerful partner. It was just something that recently, it's not like they've been playing badly, but they just looked a touch off, or it's just little things. I can't put my finger on exactly what it was, but there was just something a little bit not quite them. But at the Worlds in the earlier rounds and in that match against the Japanese, I felt that, especially in the third, I was like, wow, this is really good badminton. It was a really good match. And so for it to end like that, it is disappointing for them. I hope it's not a long-term injury. I haven't seen any updates. So hopefully Dechapol. I know they've withdrawn from the China Masters, which is the next tournament on the World Tour. But hopefully we will see them back a little bit later in the year. I'm wishing them, well, Dechapol specifically, a speedy recovery. But it did mean that coming through that section was the French pair of Thom Gicquel and Delphine Delrue. They eventually won the whole thing, creating a bucket of history. Obviously, they made history last year, being France's first world medalists in badminton. This year, they became France's first finalists, and then they became France's first gold medal winners, something that Alex Lanier later in the day doubled. What an incredible finals day it was for France. And actually, I was on before I get into what my notes were, I wrote these before I did it. Last night after the Worlds, I was part of a fan site live, a new initiative from the BWF where it was me. I was one of not the hosts, I was one of the experts alongside three others. We had Dr. Bon, Tanisha Christo, a player from India, and then we had Tommy Fuchs, who's a social media content creator based out of Germany, and the host was Selena Peak and CKU. Tommy Fuchs brought up a really good point when it came to Thom Gicquel specifically, and that was that earlier in the year at the Thomas Cup, we know France got to the final, but Thom Gicquel decided to not go with the team, and the reason being was he wanted to focus on his individual career. So he put himself ahead of the team in a way, you could say that, with a big sight being on the World Championships. And so, you know, had he lost first round or not medalled, many might have then come back at him and gone, you should have gone to the Thomas Cup. Maybe you could have helped France win the Thomas Cup. I mean, they got to the final, but you know, there would have been this kind of thing. I can imagine that. So that would have put, and he did that himself. That probably would have put a lot of pressure on him. Without him actually, he didn't have to do that. But obviously, clearly, here he can now say, see, it was the right decision to do that. It's easy to say that in hindsight, but you have to look back. That was probably a pretty big decision for him to go, because he was there at the European Team Championships that helped France qualify, and then he didn't turn up. And a lot of people, even myself included, were kind of going, why isn't he? He'd be such a valuable member of the team. But no, the reason was that he wanted to truly focus on himself and his partnership with Delphine and focus on big tournaments like the World Championships. And it's clearly paid off. So yeah, first French world champions, first European mixed doubles winners since 2009, which was Thomas Leybourne and Camilo Sayul, which funnily enough, 2009 was also held in India. It was a tight, tense and nervy affair throughout the final, but the French held it better. But I think they also implemented their style more. They stepped up, they were moving their feet better. That kept getting mentioned actually a lot, and got on top of the shuttle. In doubles events, and singles too, really, but in badminton, sometimes it's really hard to tell. You get a lot of these 50-50 rallies, or, you know, these kind of relatively even, where the shuttle's quite flat, and there's not really, it's hard to discern who's got the true advantage in the rally. But in those ones, it's about which pair can just about get on top of the rally, and from there then they can extend their advantage. And I felt that the French pair did that absolutely brilliantly. And I kind of mentioned when I spoke about Feng and Huang that moment where in the final it was 12-6, the French were 12-6 up, and then it got 12-11. And it did seem like the momentum was changing, and it was changing in the Chinese's favour, but that was at that point the French pair pulled away again, held their nerves, and came up victorious. That was rather impressive. So an absolutely insane result for them, and it's just more proof that France are clearly doing a lot of things well. And side note about France, their future is also looking very bright, as for not for the first time, but they reclaimed, or they won the European Under-19 Team Championships, defeating Denmark in the final. There was actually about a few questions saying, are France now the top team in Europe, gone ahead of Denmark? I might answer that one a little later. I don't want to kind of go off on too much of a tangent. But yeah, huge congratulations to Thom and Delphine. Absolutely fabulous. And I must also talk about their semi-final, although I will be talking about the pair that got there. That third game when they went 11-12 love up against last year's finalists in the third game. Absolutely amazing. But moving on to the bottom quarter, rounding out the mixed doubles. This is going to be a long video. Obviously, I picked Guo Junhua and Chen Fangwei, and they lost in the quarterfinals to their higher seeded compatriots of Zhang Zhangbang and Wei Yaxin. I thought actually Guo Junhua and Chen played a decent tournament, but Zhang and Wei was so much better than what they had shown in Japan and China. Maybe those few matches that they played at those events just helped them get their groove back. And I guess I can't really say much more about them without then obviously talking about the pair that did make the medal rounds, the ones I just mentioned, the number 2 seeds, Zhang and Wei. They reached the semi-finals getting the bronze, one slightly, step down from last year where they reached the final. And like I said, much better level compared to Japan and China. I doubted them, and the reason I didn't pick them was not just because I thought Guo and Chen, they'd won the China Open and just the way that they played, but the bigger reason was that Zhang and Wei were completely out of sorts in Japan and China. I felt that they played like they almost had never played together. They were clashing rackets, they were hitting shots and then moving into spaces with the other one. They were both covering similar shots. It was an absolute mess, in all honesty. They looked a little bit lost, is what I put more precisely in my notes. Not really playing with any purpose or tactics, getting in each other's way, etc. But throughout the tournament, and I think even in the semi-final, if we take away the third game, or the second, third games, the first game included, I thought Zhang Zhangbang looked ultra solid throughout, and he carried that into, like I said, into the first game of the semi-final versus the French. In my notes I wrote here after the first game, because obviously when I'm watching a match, I'll make notes throughout and etc. So as it's going on live, I said Zhang is on it. He's stepping forward. He's defending well and playing with confidence. I think the French pressed are pressing forward as that's their style, and I felt that the Chinese pair were also finding gaps over the top. So the French, they'd like to come forward and really press. Thom can make himself incredibly large, and Delphine's very good at those little pad down shots, but they can sometimes leave a little bit of space over them, which is not an easy thing to expose, and I felt the Chinese pair were exposing it incredibly well in the first. And it also seemed like the flick serve to Wei Yaxin, a tactic that was used to perfection in last year's World Final. It wasn't as guaranteed a tactic as it had been previously. But after the first game, the match completely turned around, and it seemed like once the French got a little run going, got themselves into the match, it really set the Chinese back massively. It was really, really strange. They started to play within themselves, and everything that I noted that I just said that was good before completely disappeared. And 12 love in the third set, absolutely, the game's gone. There's no way you can come back from, I dare I say no way, but it's very, very unlikely, especially if you combine it with how both pairs were playing and how they showed themselves on court. It really was a true match of two halves. I don't think the French were terrible in the first game. They were just outplayed. But in the next two, I felt that it wasn't just the French outplaying them. I thought the Chinese pair put in a rather disastrous performance at the end. But still, come away with a bronze, much better than it was in the previous two tournaments. It'd be interesting to know what the Chinese pair do with this pair, because they'd split them before, in Indonesia and Singapore in that run of tournaments, brought them back together. I think they're going to be going to the Asian Games, but after that, it's going to be quite a crucial stage for the Chinese. I wonder whether they're going to kind of maybe try things again. It's a tricky period to do it, but the Chinese coaches aren't adverse to making these difficult decisions. Now, before I move on to the one, I've done this for all the tournaments. I kind of went through my prediction notes and my predictions for each one, because I was just interested to know if there was anything that I'd put there, because when I did the video, on some of my predictions, I actually had like 3 or 4 pairs or other pairs that I didn't mention, and so I put them here, and I'm just going to quickly scan them, and if there's anything I think that I haven't mentioned, or something I think is quite interesting, or something that I'd written hadn't said but it came true, then I will mention it. Now, the top section, I mainly spoke about Utanabe and Maya Taguchi. Is anything here? No, nothing for the next section. It was mainly my complications between picking either the Danish pair or the Hong Kong pair. I wrote in the next one, I do think that Dechapol and Supissara will face the French pair in the quarters, which was to be had, and I said that'll be quite the showdown. But I think, because I actually think they played the French pair in India early in the year, it was a comfy win, will help them, but obviously we never got to see that match. There's nothing in any of those notes. So moving on, women's doubles did slightly better here. I got 2 out of the 4, my predictions correctly, and I guess to give myself a little bit more of a cheering up, because I know these predictions didn't go brilliantly for me, is that both those pairs made the final. And the first of those was right at the top, is Liu Shengshu and Tang Ning. They got to the final, yet surprisingly lost. I guess surprising because most people, they're the world number 1 pair. They'd only been beaten twice this year. And they obviously hadn't been beaten by Baek, and Lee So-hee. So it was a little bit of a surprise. I felt that in the final, I got here, the nerves riddled their performance, but I think also the Korean defense was absolutely mental. I will actually say, and I wrote these in my notes here, I think it had these 2 pairs, say the conditions, because the conditions in the arena seem to be changing daily. There was drift going away from the camera, then it seemed to come back, then it went back again, then there's a sideways drift, and then that seemed to change. It was conditions that were very tricky for the players. I think had they been consistent, say, just pick any of the conditions that happened, I think had they just been that consistently, they weren't that difficult. The drift wasn't absolutely mental, but it was the fact that it kept changing. In fact, just to skip ahead, I saw something from Victor Lai, an interview where he said that I think in his semi-final, the drift had changed from the quarter-final, and so the end that he picked, he thought would favour him, and in the end it actually went against him. That's how it can affect players. And the reason I bring it up in regards to the women's doubles is that I think on the first few days where the drift was definitely, the shuttles were also, I think they played with a slightly faster shuttle in the early days, but it definitely played a bit quicker, the arena. I think had it been on those days, it'd have been a lot harder for Baek, and Lee So-hee to defend the way it did against the Chinese, and I think the Chinese attack would have been far more effective. But that's not what happened. When it came to the final, the defensive play of the Koreans was absolutely on point, and they must have been absolutely loving the fact that as the tournament went on, the conditions got slower and slower. The more the tournament went on, the more it favoured them. You can see that in the way that they came through the draw. I will talk about that a little bit when I actually get to them. Otherwise, when I get to that section, I'll be like, I've already said this all. So, yes, back to the Chinese pair. I've mentioned the nerves in the final, but they were also present in the epic semi-final that I watched with Gayatri and Teresa Jolly. For me, in that match, for a game and a half, the Indians were absolutely sublime. They were running high on adrenaline. They were taking on risks, especially Teresa Jolly. They weren't afraid of the Chinese pair and were just playing like really good high-tempo badminton. But then there was this absolute epic rally at 12-all. And in my notes, I even said like that's one of the rallies of the tournament. But it was almost after that, this euphoric high of this rally, that the match completely changed. The Indians completely fell off the cliff. Things didn't fall their way, and the Chinese got a hold on the match, and again, even more of a game of 2 halves than the mixed doubles final. So there were definitely signs of vulnerability for this pair throughout. And actually, when I was watching their final, it reminded me a little bit of their final from last year when they beat Pearly Tan and Tina Rotherham in their first, obviously, world title in Paris. And again, they came up against a pair that also is able to get a lot back and scrap for absolutely everything. And if I remember, the conditions were a little bit faster, which I think helped them. But, pressure's also on, it's just a whole different kind of ball game. But I remember the Liu and Tan, if I think back to their last really nervy performance before this world final, it was last year's world final. I don't know why, just when I was watching, I was like, you expect them to come out and be all super solid because they've been in big finals before, and obviously they're the world champions. But I was like, this is a little bit similar to the last final. And yeah, I think they did. I think Jill and Steen mentioned this a lot, and we mentioned about the Koreans' defense, but obviously that meant that the patience on the Chinese side needed to be at an absolute highest, and it just wasn't. Again, I think I'm not sure if I had this in my notes. I just felt that the Korean defense was good, but it wasn't just survival defense. They were making life difficult and awkward for the Chinese pair. So, yeah, you could say they should have won the final. They'd won their last 5 meetings against the Korean pair. Once did go to 3 actually this year, and that was actually in India, but this time it was 2 straight games. Okay, moving on. Fan and Zhang Shushan were my next pick. They didn't come through. They lost in the quarterfinals to another one of the most surprising results, and another underdog story from this, which was the Indian pair that I kind of touched on already, is Gayatri and Jolly. In their match between the Chinese pair and the Indians, between Zhang and Gayatri and Jolly, I think the attack from the Indians was good, but it was the stepping into defence that was key. They never backed off. Every single time, front foot, front foot, front foot. And I think that was actually, I kind of touched on that, something they showed in the semi-final too. They just weren't quite able to sustain it to the same sort of level. A few occasions I saw where shots that went through the front Chinese player, they were almost unexpected. There was a little bit of hesitancy from the Chinese. It was quite hard to tell if they were just a little bit too far forward, or there was pressure, or it was the quality from the Indians, or something else. I'll tell you what was surprising, or what was something definite, is that in the third game, Chinese were 4-1 up, and then they found themselves 11-5 down. It was a little bit surprising, I guess, to not see Fan, who's so experienced, 4-time world champion herself, Olympic champion, not use all of that vast experience. But in all honesty, it was the Indians' brilliance that brought them through. I think the conditions also helped them in the earlier days of their style. Again, and I said this about the final, with the conditions helping the Korean pair and their defenses. I actually think when it came to the semi-finals, which was when it was really more noticeable for me that the conditions started to slow down, I think that actually helped Liu and Tan a little bit, just put a little bit of a stop on the power and the explosivity of the Indians. But it was, talking of them, I've mentioned them a lot, Gayatri, Gopichand and Teresa Jolly were the pair that came through that and got a bronze medal, and in the process kept India's medal running streak at the World Championships alive, a streak that they've held since 2011. That's quite an impressive record, because the only other nation that have done that is China. Indonesia is a technicality. 2021. There was one pair in the mix that played. I think it was Ferdinand went, but that's because they were independent national team. So PBSI withdrew their team from the Worlds because it was the one that was right at the end. So whether you count that, if you allow Indonesia a pass on that, which I technically do, then Indonesia have also had a medal at every single World Championships in the same period, and it goes back a bit further. But India are in very high company there. So Korea haven't done that. Thailand, Japan, Denmark. Oh no, obviously Denmark didn't get any medals this time. But anyway, back to the Indian pair. I think the last thing I'll say is that the fact that early this year at the Asia Championships, in the build-up to that, Teresa Jolly ruptured, did a load of ankle ligament injury that meant that she was off court for 7 weeks, bed rest for 7 weeks, and then it required like another 2 months or so of rehabilitation. It was like pretty much 3 months out from playing, and I think again I referenced the fan site live that I did yesterday. Tanisha Crasto said that there were actually doubts that they'd even be able to play in this tournament. There were doubts that they would be ready, but they certainly were, and what a comeback and what an event to do it at. I think that they have spoken about how they have developed their other formations. Jolly's the more the rear court player, and Gayatri the rear court player, but they definitely improved in the different things. I'm a really big fan of Teresa Jolly. I saw her at the BXL last year, and a lot of her teammates were like, wow, she's got so much power and variety from the back, and she's just a really good all-round player, and she showed all of that skill at the World Championship. So whilst I didn't pick them, and it was still a surprise, I'm also not surprised that they pulled off wins like this. We've seen them get to the All England semi-finals a couple of times, doing similar sort of things, defeating these kinds of pairs. So absolutely fabulous stuff from them. And it was a huge win against, like I said, against Zhang and Zhang. I think that's the first time they'd beaten Fan, possibly, ever. So huge for them. Next was another one of my picks that came through, and that was the eventual winners, Baek Na and Lee So-hee. I had them, if you remember in the prediction video, as a pair that could either go to the final or lose early, depending on which kind of Koreans that we saw. I'd say we still saw, for the most part, a rather static front court Baek Hana / Korean pair. But, it's a huge but, their defence was insanely strong, and as I've already mentioned, as the tournament progressed, the conditions seemed to get slightly less drifty, slightly slower, so I felt that their chances got bigger and bigger and bigger. But even I was quite surprised that they managed to win the final as easily as they did. I think what shows the fact that the conditions were not so favourable was they had a really tough third round against Hirakami and Hobara. Actually, was a Japanese pair that I mentioned in the prediction, saying that if they just sit back with a two static, they're going to really struggle against that pair because of the way that they play and how fast and attacking they can be. And clearly, it was a difficult match regardless, but the conditions also made it that little bit tougher. But yeah, from that match on, pretty much their defensive game was borderline impenetrable. They've become the first Korean winners since Gil Yong-ah and Jang Yok in 1995. In fact, they're the only other Korean winners, which it sounds pretty crazy when you think of all the amazing pairs that have come through from Korea, and you see them as a strong nation in the women's disciplines. For Lee So-hee, she now has the full set of medals, and this was her 11th World Championships. So I think I saw a stat that it's the longest time for a player, in terms of number of World Champs played, to actually win one, because this will see her first gold. So that's absolutely crazy, and a testament to her drive and desire and determination and her perseverance to keep going. Yeah, a really impressive week from the Koreans. I've seen a lot of chat over the last, it keeps coming back and forth for the last year or 18 months, that maybe this pair should split, because we've seen the Koreans split a number of their other pairs, that they aren't as good as they were before. Well, I think this result proves that they are still obviously very, very capable. And rounding out my predictions for the women's doubles was I obviously had Yuki Fukushima and Mayu Matsumoto, which sadly, like Dechapol and Supissara, they had to sadly withdraw in their match earlier in the week. I think they lost the opening game it was one of the Indonesian pairs, I can't remember which one it was, but they were actually up in the second game. They lost the first, but then they were leading 11-5 or something. And then Yuki Fukushima decided to call it a day because of an injury. I did try to find what injury it was. I couldn't quite find it. So if anyone knows, do put it in the comment section. But yeah, it was an injury to Yuki Fukushima, which was a huge shame. Again, no one wants to see injuries to any players, but also they were such huge tournament favourites. And I would love to have seen how a potential semi-final between those two and Baek Hana and Lee So-hee would have gone down. The conditions by the semi-final stage would definitely got a little bit slower, so we would have seen that solid Korean defense. But I think Japanese, especially with Matsumoto having one of the biggest attacks, and her finger power and strength and sharpness that she's got, is something that can damage any pair in any sort of conditions. It would have been quite the showdown, but unfortunately we didn't get to see it. And the pair that came through was the Chinese pair of Li Yijing and Luo Zhu-min. I didn't really see too many of their matches, to be honest with you. I watched a bit of their semi-final versus the Koreans, but what I noticed, it was a bit like all other pairs by that stage, as they just struggled to break down the defense of the Koreans. They were just far too solid for them. I guess the big question about this pair is if they will continue forward. I think that was something that Jill Clark mentioned during the medal ceremony, because China has been mixing a number of their women's doubles pairs outside the top two. So I wonder, and this pair falls under that bracket. They had another pair at these World Championships as well, that I think those are the four players they've been mixing around. So it'll be quite interesting to see what China do with them. So again, like with the mixed doubles, I've added my prediction notes, some of my other notes from my prediction document. See if there's anything like that. I guess here right at the top, Luan Tan. Again, I had mentioned in my prediction that Kim Hee-jong and Kong Hee-yong were in that section, the winners of the Japan Open, and that could be potentially a very feisty quarterfinals that we might get to see. But sadly, Kim and Kong withdrew before the tournament gang. I think it's Kong Hee-yong with her. As we know, that earlier in the year she had an ankle injury and required surgery. That's why they had come back. That was their first tournament back in Japan. I'm not sure whether that tour had done a bit of damage, or whether there was just still, it wasn't 100% healed, and the coaches didn't want her to risk it. We do have the Asian Games next month, which I hope we get to see them play at. But yeah, no, they were unfortunately unable to play, which is a real shame. I said in the third quarter, I think we'll see Korea versus Indonesia in the quarters. And if so, my money's on the Koreans, which is what we did get to see. And in the bottom bit, I think I said here it's hard for me to see it not be between the two highest seeds, which was Fukushima Matsumoto and Lee and Luo, which didn't happen because of the injury to Yuki Fukushima. Yeah, no, it was all about those two pairs, to be honest with you, which I think it would have been had it not been for the withdrawal. So, again, I did like with the women's doubles, I didn't do a dark horse because I'd completely forgotten to do it. It's silly of me to try and add one in now. So overall 2 out of 4. So moving on to the men's doubles, where I did have a dark horse. And actually, for the men's doubles, for my main picks, I ended up with 1 out of 4. And that pair did lose in the semi-finals, and that was the top pair that I'll speak about in a second. But if you count the dark horse, then I got 2. And they also lost in the semi-finals. But again, I'll talk about them in a second. So my pick that came through for me, but they lost, you could say, surprisingly. They didn't make it to the final. That was the number 1 seeds, the defending champions, the Koreans, Kim Won-ho and Seo Sun-jae. They lost in the semi-finals to the Malaysian pair of Aaron Cha and So Yik. I've written here a slightly surprising loss, possibly considering that the Malaysians had the break. They'd been split before the event, so they were truly lacking true tournament play together. And on top of this, I thought that in the build-up throughout the tournament, the Koreans had been playing pretty well. They took care of Ben Lane and Sean Vendy, the European champions, pretty comfortably. They then defeated the pair that beat them in Indonesia, Gozafei and Nur Zudin, that were potential bananas again, pretty comfortably. So it looked like they were doing pretty well. They had odd moments, but again, for the most part, I thought they were coming through the draw pretty well, and I thought they might do the same to Aaron Cha and Siyek, but they weren't. I guess the only doubt I did have heading into the semi-final, and you can see it immediately when they're coming out, was Kim Won-ho's right knee. At the start of the second game against Go and Nurna quarters, he did land slightly funny, and you could see it was on his mind throughout the game, but the Malaysians weren't able to expose it, and I thought Seo Sun-jae kind of covered it. And I think after the mid-game interval, Kim Won-ho's knee, it kind of probably felt okay enough. It kind of seemed to loosen up or whatever it was, but you could see it heavily taped in that semi-final. But to be honest, losing to Aaron Cha and Siyek, it wasn't the knee injury. You can't go, the knee injury is why they lost. Maybe it made Kim Won-ho that slightly slower. And I think whenever one half of your pair is slightly down, it's always going to affect your partner. Very hard even for someone like Seo Sun-jae to really step up and take charge of absolutely everything. But in all honesty, it was the fantastic and phenomenal play of Aaron Cha and So Woo-yik that they played an absolutely brilliant match. Aaron Cha was on absolutely everything. He was opening up gaps, countering, and just being Aaron Cha. And then So Yik backed him up brilliantly. Didn't allow the Koreans to get much from him, because So Yik's that kind of player. He is phenomenal. I'm not doubting him, but Aaron Cha is the man when it comes to Malaysian men's doubles. You pretty much ask anyone who's the best Malaysian men's doubles player, Aaron Cha is going to get the nod pretty much 9 times out of 10, if 99 times out of 100. And so I feel like sometimes some pairs have got success when they've played them by trying to get as much as they can out of So Yik. And I think over the last year and a bit, I know they've won the world title for that, and they've won 2 Olympic bronzes, and he's had his moments, but he's not just built up his front court game, but he's just built up that ability that he knows he's going to get punished or he's going to get picked on, and his ability to hang tough. And actually, that reminds me, when they won the world title in 2022, I remember an interview with Mohamed Hassan, who was one half of the daddies who played them in the final, and he said that the tactic from them was to try and pin it on So Yik, and he said, we tried and we tried and we tried and we couldn't break him down. He played phenomenally. His defense was super solid in his just general play. And we saw more of that in this match against Kim Won-ho and Seo Sun-jae. On top of that, I felt that he played some lovely angled shots and created space. And for the Malaysians, I know I'm talking about a lot of them. I might not have too much left to say when we get to them later on. But similar to their quarterfinal, where they played the young Chinese pair, I felt that their defense was up to the task, and not just that, but they were able to switch it into attack. In the quarterfinal and semi-final that I saw from the Malaysians, when they were on the defense, they were never on it for too long. They always found a way to switch it into some sort of attacking situation. It was absolutely brilliant stuff. I'm still on the section about the Koreans. The Koreans weren't bad. Like I said, maybe hampered by Kim Won-ho's knee, but they couldn't quite come out on top in those classic doubles situations. The service situation, the flat game, the 50-50 areas, every single one of those, Malaysians had them beat. And I don't think I've ever seen the Koreans pulled out of position as much as I did in this match. The Malaysians held their position so much better. And if you remember, if I mentioned that a little bit in the mix, and I talked about Yang Po-Xuan and Feng doing that against Boje and Christiansen, it was slightly different. But in this match, if you looked at it, the Malaysians were never really out of position, whereas I felt there was a number of times, and I've never seen this from the Korean pair. Usually they're so solid at a very basic game. If they're not in a great position, lots of steady drops and patient attack. Just so many times where the Koreans seemed, if you took like a snapshot, they were completely out of position and there was lots of space that the Malaysians could use, and they did. They completely capitalized on it. I thought the Koreans were a little bit down on their usual speed of movement, speed of shot, or both. And I did see a post-match interview, I think it was with Kim Won-ho and Seo-seung-jae, and it was translated, it was on the Korean Badminton Instagram page, and even they commended the sharpness and the speed of the Malaysian shots, gave them very little time, and they just felt constantly under pressure. So obviously Kim Won-ho, Seo-seung-jae weren't able to retain their title, but they did give me 1 point here. And Seo-seung-jae he'd won the world title twice because he won it with Kang Min-hyuk in 2023 as well. So his little run as world champion has come to an end. But I have no doubt that they have got the skills and the capability to come back from this. A lot of people are still asking whether they're finished or whether they're going to fall off from number one. Still far too early. There's the Asian Games next month, which is going to be absolutely huge, and I think there's some big players potentially playing in that one. Moving on, in the next section, I did pick last year's silver medalists, Chen Boyang and Liu Yi of China. They lost relatively early to their younger compatriots, a pair who only got in because of Takuro Hoki and Yugo Kobayashi's withdrawal. And that is Hu Ke-yuang and Lin Shangyi, who are, if you don't know, they were the World Junior silver medalists and Asian Junior champions in 2024. They are the same age as Aaron Tai and Kang Kai-shing. Those two pairs had quite the rivalry in their junior days. I only saw brief moments of that match between the two Chinese pairs. It was on one of the streaming courts. I had to go coach, and when I got to the club that I coached at, they had the badminton on, and that match was on. I watched brief bits, and I just felt that the more experienced Chinese pair seemed a bit flat. There was a lot of errors. They never really seemed in the match, or never settled, more precise, and they just lost to a better pair on the day. So last year's finalists were knocked out in the second round, and they had a bye, so it was their first match. Obviously, the pair that came through that, I'd already spoken about quite a bit, and that was Aaron Char and So Yik, who finished up as silver medalists. Rexy Meineke, one of the coaches for the men's doubles team, I think he's the head coach actually for Malaysian badminton, did say before these championships that there's no need to worry about them having not played much together because of their break from being split, and he was right. And I was wrong, because that was one of the reasons that I doubted them, didn't pick them, is that whilst I felt they had a really nice draw, and it got even better because of the unfortunate incident for T Kai-won where he got diarrhea, or Delhi belly as it's sometimes called over there. But I didn't pick them. Ultimately it didn't prove much wrong. In fact, they played some of the best badminton. Well, that semi-final was some of the best badminton I'd seen them in ever. And I wrote here jokingly in my notes, highlighted it in bold and italics, that the only reason I didn't pick them is so that I'd be their jinx. So I wouldn't be their jinx, because there's a thing, I think, with a lot of people, sometimes think that I can jinx pairs or stuff. I know that was the case in the past for some nations. And I remember, is it the Olympics that I didn't pick any Malaysians? And then they won and had a really good medal haul, obviously, with Aaron and So winning the bronze. So I can kind of hide behind that. I didn't pick them because I didn't want to be their jinx, but no, that wasn't it. I didn't pick them because they hadn't played much together. Obviously with the split, that was actually pretty much the big reason for it. And I felt that actually if they did face Chen and Liu, that that would have been a tough match for them. But what a great tournament for them. They were a little bit slow in their first match against Sukbun and Teratsukun. But that was their first match in the hall, and the Thais are a tricky pair, and they'd also played around before, so they managed to get their footing in, and then from there they played really, really good. They got better and better, and like I said, it culminated in that fabulous performance to defeat the defending champions Kim Won-ho and Seo Sun-jae in the semi-final. In the final, they had to play against Wang Chang and Liang Weikang, who obviously I'll mention in a bit. They had the chips were stacked against the Malaysians a little bit. Their head-to-head record against them wasn't particularly good. I think I remember after they beat Kim Won-so, the next match was Wang and Liang, against Liang and Yang Po-shwan, and a lot of Malaysians were like, let's just hope it isn't the Chinese that come through, because if they do, then we're cooked. And that's kind of what happened. I think the big thing when it comes to that final is that in the quarterfinal and semi-final, I want to mention this, when they were on the defence, they were... Obviously, we know Malaysians are very strong in defence, but they were able to turn it into attacking opportunities. And in the final, they just really struggled to get out of that defensive position. Like I said, before they were able to turn it and create chances. Here, those chances were snuffed out. The Chinese were absolutely phenomenal. And also, against some of the other pairs, who obviously have, we know Kim Won-ho and Seo Sun-jae, but Kim Won-ho especially is very good in that. I'm a really big fan of Kim Won-ho's net play when he's at his best, but even against the Chinese, when they could challenge the net, Wang Chang was just too good. I think Steen Pedersen said best front court player in the world, and I would agree when he's on it, he certainly is. And I think even Liang Weikang has improved and developed that area, etc. And if you look at the service situation, Liang Weikang, if he's at the front, he's got that pretty solid tumble serve. Yeah, again, lastly, like I said about their match against the Koreans, the speed and ability to crawl the Koreans out of position, again, that was just not possible against the Chinese. They were far too quick and rotated far too well. I guess the big question when it comes to the Malaysian pair now is, will they be split permanently or not? I've seen a few posts on Instagram or social media today saying that, I think even Aaron Cha has been quoted as saying, the original pairs are the best. So maybe getting into the world final. I know they're not playing together for the Asian Games. I think those pairs have already been set in stone with it being Aaron Cha and T Kai Won. But I could foresee that if the Asian Games doesn't go too well for Malaysia, say Aaron and T don't do as well as maybe what the coaches hope, then I could definitely foresee the Malaysian coaches going, right, let's keep Aaron Cha and Sohyik together. Maybe we play around Man and T and Aaron Tai and Kang Kai-shing. Maybe that's something. I've said in the past that I think we should leave the young Malaysian pairs alone, Aaron Tai and Kang Kai-shing. But maybe there's scope to keep Aaron and Sohyik together and then move around and play around with the other pairs. Because I think Aaron and Sohyik have proven, yes, they haven't done amazingly well outside of these worlds over the last year or so, but again, they proved that they can come back together, and they took apart the world number ones. That's got to be something that the coaches are looking to. I know that in the commentary box, Steen Pedersen mentioned that the coaches are not looking for a good pair now. They're looking for a good pair in 2 years' time at the Olympics, because that's the main goal. I get that. It makes sense. But I think with Aaron Cha and Sohyik's age and their experience together and what they've done in previous Olympics, I think it makes sense personally to keep those two together. If you want to play around with pairs for the future, then you've got to look at your true youngsters, which is Aaron Tai and Kang Kai-shing. And the last thing I said is, I think Gildan came up with a really good counterpoint and it's something that, if you go by what Aaron Cha said, that the originals are best and we want to stay together, is what's stopping them then going independent and leaving the national centre. They would have lucrative money deals coming their way. They could make probably far more money. And I think with Malaysia having so many independent pairs, their training partners would be absolutely... they'd have no shortage. You've got Go and Ner, and you've still got Tam Wee Kyong and his... I can't remember his name. And then you've got, I think, obviously Govi Shen with Choi Seo-gyo. They obviously would do some training in Malaysia. And it might even, as a knock-on, even help singles players like Lee Zijia, because he's friendly with them. They could create a pretty good training block, and I don't think the Malaysian coaches will want that, because they will want that pair there to help the players under BAM. They've got to kind of consider that. It's all going to be very interesting to see how it all unfolds in the next couple of months. I think after the Asian Games is when we're going to start to get some pretty good idea of how that's going to pan out. But still, great week for the Malaysian pairs. A silver medal completing the set. They've got the gold from 2022. I don't know how many bronzes they got. Definitely one. And now they've got a silver. Moving on. My next pick in that third quarter was the Indonesian pair of Raymond Indra and Nicholas Yao-Quinn, and they lost rather early to another Malaysian pair of Yap Roy King and Junaidi Arif. This actually was a match, I think, heading into day 3. I think it was on day 3 that I saw Steven Pedersen put out something on social media, kind of screenshotted from his Twitter account. Something was like, there's plenty of tasty matches, but 2 matches that stood out to him. One of them was Panitchaphon versus Alex Lanier, which ended up being quite one-sided. But another one was this men's doubles between Yap Roy King and Junaidi Arif and Raymond Indra and Nicholas Yao-Quinn. And it turned out to be a pretty good match, but it was the Malaysians that came out on top. In the first game, it was really close, nip and tuck, 16-all. But then the Malaysians closed it out absolutely phenomenally, winning the last 5 points on the bounce. I said here, they got their front foot going. They were on the front foot and took it to the opponent. They were helped by some errors from the Indonesians, but it was the Malaysians who were a little bit more willing to win it than to sit back. And you could probably kind of put that to the second game as well. Just overall, I felt the Malaysians just were the pair that wanted to win it that little bit more rather than let their opponents lose it. Again, in the second, I felt the Malaysians rarely went from an attacking position to losing it. The Indonesians found it hard to get out of the defensive situation. And yeah, like I said, the Malaysians, once on the attack, they kept it. I felt that Nicholas Yao-Quinn made a number of easy errors, but in all, the Malaysians were more solid. They made less errors and converted their attack far more often and far more frequently. But the pair that came through this section were the pair that eventually won the whole tournament, and that was Wang Chang and Liang Wei Kang. Always capable. We know this, Olympic silver medalists. They've won some big tournaments before. But I must say they brought a whole new level to their game here. But it must be said, that level only really manifested itself from the quarterfinals onwards, because before then they looked a little bit ropey. They went to 3 games, had a very close one with the English pair of Alex Green and Zach Russ, had a very close match against Kim Astrup and Anders Rasmussen. I think they didn't actually see much of that match against the Danes, but I think they were quite far down in the third, but managed to come back and squeak it. But against Ranki Reddy and Shetty in the quarterfinals, Li Zhiwei and Yang Po Xuan in the semi-finals, and then Aaron Chan-Soyik in the final. They were absolutely impeccable. For me, Wang Chan was an absolute demon in the net, so fast. And I think Liang Wei Kang, like I've said this in numerous recent breakdowns, has improved so many areas of his game. He's lost weight, he looks fitter and faster. His front court has got better. He has developed an awesome tumble serve, and it's his mentality as well. He's always seen as someone in the past that you can kind of get on top of. I can remember a number of their matches. I remember one from the All England when they lost to the Daddies, and it was the fact that the Daddies just got on top of Liang Wei Kang, and he just looked vulnerable and fragile. And then as a result, that would kind of play into Wang Chang, who would end up trying to do too much. Not at this tournament, or definitely not in the rounds that count, the quarterfinals, semi-finals, and final. In fact, I think, and beyond this tournament before it, it's been Wang Chang that's looked more vulnerable. But, like I said, in those final rounds, both of them were working seamlessly as a unit. And I put here in my notes for the Chinese pair in the final against Aaron Chan-Soyik, I felt that the Chinese are doing to the Malaysians what we saw the Malaysians do to the Koreans in the semi-final. They were beating them in every single situation. They kept them in the defence. They were winning the service situation. They were closing down the gaps. They were winning 50-50 situations. And the Chinese also lured the Malaysians into counters. I think by the second game, you could see the Malaysians were a little resigned to the silver. I think they kind of they gave a good fight in the first, and obviously they came out swinging in the second. But there was definitely a moment in that second where I think, with the heavy head-to-head record against the Chinese and just the way the Chinese pair were playing, you could see some resignation in the faces of the Malaysians. I think they were like, no, there's not much we can really do. There's not really there's not a solution today. There wasn't even an inkling of one where they could go, okay, there's something there. We can try to maybe get something out of this. There was absolutely nothing, and that was just an absolute testament to the Chinese pair and the level that they brought on finals day. They did become the first Chinese winners in 8 years. And this was something I mentioned on the fan site live, that I was really impressed with their mentality, was that going into that match, with the fact that Feng and Huang and Liu and Tan had lost, had Huang and Liang lost, it would have been the first time in World Championship history that China hadn't won a gold, at least one gold medal. So there was a little bit of that on the line, which I think is just like shows the mentality improvements to this Chinese pair, especially to Liang Weikang, because he just didn't look, neither of them, they didn't look nervous, they didn't look anything. They just, I don't know, it was absolutely phenomenal. But they were just brilliant. I think I wrote here at the end, this was actually someone's question, but it wasn't really a question. So I think Liang and Huang love India. They won the India Open twice, including this year, and now they won the Worlds for the first time in India. So clearly they do. India agrees with Wang Chang and Liang Weikang. Right, rounding out the bottom section, I had picked Fajar Alfian and Muhammad Shohibul Fikri, and they lost the quarterfinals to Yang Po-Xuan and Li Jiawei. And it must be said that maybe this can give me a free pass, as Li Jiawei and Yang Po-Xuan weren't supposed to be in that section, because they took the spot of Hoki and Kobayashi. I felt, again, in that match against the Chinese Taipei pair, in the second game, the Taipei pair got so good at the no-lift badminton, the kind of area that we kind of associate with Indonesian badminton. Even from very tricky positions, they kept it flat. World-class men's doubles. I'm just reading my notes here, sorry. I love this about their game. I'm talking about the Taiwanese pair. Many times I felt that the lift would be the best option or the easier one. Yet the pair from Taiwan, Chinese Taipei, tried to find the gap, they nudged it, and when they did lift, they were always then looking to press, which actually I'm guessing is a common theme within the doubles disciplines. The pairs that were just a little bit more willing and daring to try things, to not just give out the lift and to try and counter, were the ones that succeeded. And that's a little bit surprising that the Indonesian pair were usually so good. They were brilliant at that in Japan and China, and obviously we know that Indonesian badminton are pretty good at the no-lift style, that it didn't quite work out for them. I think maybe this was their first World Championships as a pair, and maybe the fact that they had done so well before, the expectation just went up that little bit more, and that just got to them. I don't quite know what the situation was in that regards, but just definitely a few too many errors from the Indonesians in those departments, missing many shots they don't usually. I felt they never really got going and came up against a dangerous pair in Li Jiawei and Yang Po-Xuan, who were also in very good form. So I guess I have to talk about Li and Yang, who actually were my dark horse pick. So they gave me, let's just say they gave me an additional point. So technically I've come out 2 out of 4, well, 2 out of 5, I guess. But anyway, they've become the first Taipei medalist at the World Championship since actually the current 2-time Olympic champion Wang Jilin, with the guy that actually coached them, Chen Hongling, and that was back in 2018. I already mentioned this in the mixed doubles, but I was a huge fan of Yang Po-Xuan this week. He played really well in the mixed, beating big medal contenders there along the way. I noticed this in the mixed doubles, but I just felt that his speed around the court looked that little bit higher here in India. Against Huang and Liang, though, it was for me, it was like fighting fire with fire, and Wang and Liang had the bigger flamethrower. They tried everything, they threw everything at them, but it was just like everything they could do really well, the Chinese pair could just do twice as well. They just weren't able to kind of get any sort of advantage in that respect, or not enough. They obviously could, but for every, say, 5 rallies, it was 3-2 to the Chinese, and so it just kind of obviously ended up with them on the back foot. But yeah, really good to see, actually, because Li and Yang, like I said, are always a dangerous pair. They haven't had the best of years. I think I remember Steen saying there's been an injury to Li Jiawei, an injury that he has to kind of, there's nothing they can really do. I don't know what that injury is, whether it's something to do with his wrist. I know that he has his wrist always taped up, his right wrist. But I don't know. Again, if anyone knows, then please do put it in the comments. But what a fabulous tournament. Always a really entertaining pair to watch. So, again, like with all my other sections, my notes from the prediction document. Top one, I did actually say, I have to be transparent. I had the Li twins as a potential dark horse pick, because I've been impressed with them recently, and they always seem to play well against good pairs and have had some decent results. But I don't actually know where they got to in this tournament, actually. So that shows how much of an impact they had. The next section, obviously, I said about the Malaysian pair and Charan So Yik that they had a nice little section of the draw, good half. Obviously, I did say towards the Koreans, who they obviously then did put out. But again, my main things about them was the fact that not only had they been split, but because the pairs the new pairings, they played the Taipei Open and the Korean Masters, which were after Japan and China. They had even less time to prepare, but clearly they didn't need to. So yeah, and not really much anything else from there. And the next one, there's a few things about the Indian pair, and obviously the injury concerns and the fitness for the Chinese. Which version will we see? In brackets, Wang Chang. We saw both versions are good and bad, but when it mattered in the later rounds, we saw, well, not good, very good from Wang Chan. For the Indonesians, which I think I'm talking about Indra and Joaquin, can they handle the situation or inexperienced play a role? Slightly similar. I think for the Malaysians, slightly similar, although on a lower level. So that's Yap and Junaidi. Obviously, they stepped up quite well. And then I said with the Danes, Ash and Rasmussen, can they step out of nowhere, or is it really the end for them? Actually, that's a pretty good question, because I think they showed a fantastic level against Wang Chan and Wang Kang. I haven't said that the Chinese weren't firing all cylinders, but that's some of the best badminton that I've seen from Ash and Rasmussen for a long, long time. So, I think they can take some confidence from that moving forward. I'm not sitting here going, we're going to see a resurgence of them, because they are pushing it, but they definitely showed. I saw, I think Anna's Rasmussen had posted on Instagram that they're very excited for the next run of tournaments coming up after these World Championships. They still got clearly plenty more goals left in their badminton. I guess the last thing I've said here is just it's a difficult section to call, just like all of them. And then for the bottom one, I said for Alfie and Fikri, not a particularly nice draw for them, with 2 bogey pairs, one of which obviously was withdrawn and was replaced by my dark horse, which is always a bogey pair that they managed to come through against Kam Min-hyuk and Ki Dong-ju. But obviously Li and Yang were just a little bit too much for them. So moving on to the 4th out of 5 disciplines, the women's singles. And again, a bit like the women's doubles, I got 2 out of 4, and both of them were in the final, with the top one being An Se-young, who ended up as the champion, 2-time world champion now. Absolutely phenomenal. Now, there were some doubts about An Se-young with her fitness. She played 1 match in Japan, then withdrew out of China. There was foot injuries, and then I'd heard there were talks about her knee, and then at the tournament she turned up and had her left elbow all taped, which I actually have no idea what's wrong with her left elbow. Again, please, anyone, do fill me in. I want to know. And I must say, in her earlier rounds and throughout the whole tournament up until the final, we take the final out for now, I felt she looked a little bit unsure of her game and of herself throughout the tournament, which is ridiculous, because again, in that fan site thing, I said this point, and Tommy Fuchs looked at me like I said something alien, something stupid, because he said, but you got to the final without dropping a game. And I was like, yeah, but this is An Se-young. We expect big things. And I compared it to the final, where she did play brilliant badminton, absolutely top of the game. It was an amazing champion's performance. But up until that final, yes, she did come through without losing a game, but I felt that she just looked unsure of herself. There were certain movements where it was almost like that moment of like when you're just about to lunge to a shot, you're not thinking about the shot and what your opponent's going to do next. You're thinking, is this going to hurt? Or can I come out of this? Just those little doubts that just detract. And I've said this for a number of breakdowns. I said this when you're talking about partnerships, when you've got one half of the pair with injuries, is as the partner, you can sometimes just be slightly pulled away from your own game because you're a little bit concerned of what your partner can and can't do because of their injury. And I referenced in the singles, if there's anything like a slight injury on your mind or whatever, you're slightly unwell or whatever, if it's detracting from your sole job, which is how do I beat the person across the net for me, it will massively affect you or affect you by a couple of percent. And that's all it takes at the highest level. And it was that I could see throughout Unseung's game. If we take the final out, throughout, like I said here in my notes, the final was a whole different beast when she played Akane Yamaguchi, who was going for a record of 4 world titles. But the difference for me between the semi-final and the final was clear as day. In the semi-final against Wang Ziyi, maybe it was because of Wang Ziyi's physical doubts, with her legs taped because of her cramp from earlier in the week, and she definitely was struggling after that, after her match against PV Sindhu. Maybe that changed her game to focus more on longer, more grueling rallies, because maybe she felt that, okay, if the rallies go on really long, Wang Ziyi, there's no way that she can fight through cramp again. I just think that Unseung forgot to try and attack or apply pressure there, bar a few spells near the end. I think right at the end, the final third of the second game, we started to see a little bit more of Unseung from what we saw in the final, where she started to open up. But then again, my notes here, Wang Ziyi does play that way and is more steady with her shot selection compared to Akane Yamaguchi. There's safer blocks, nets, and lifts, so you can't expect a more attacking play style. Whereas against Yamaguchi, it does her style invites a more attacking one because she plays faster. She's throwing everything at Unseung. She plays ultra creatively. The whole style of the match changes. And so, of course, Unseung has to adapt. But definitely in the semi-final, I felt that Wang Unseung might have been slightly the injury or whatever it was to Wang Ziyi, her downness in her physicality, or what she definitely perceived, because her quarterfinal, she looked like she couldn't really move. I think it threw Unseung. Do you know if you play someone with an injury or someone you can tell is clearly not at it, it can sometimes throw you like, do I play normally? Do I play this? I don't know. Unseung looked like she was just going to go for the long game. And to be fair to Wang Ziyi, she actually could hold up okay in that. But yeah, no. Having said that, in the final, she was absolutely amazing. The pace of that women's singles final was absolutely through the roof. I think even Jill Clark said, this is faster than the men's singles. And then Steen laughed and she was like, no, Steen, I'm being serious. And when Jill says that, she is being deadly serious. And actually, to be fair, I think for the most part, I think Jill might actually have had a case. It was phenomenal. But I felt that in the final, I felt that Unseung did a lot of things that she's done quite well when she played against Yamaguchi in the past. She obviously was more prepared for the faster game. She matched the speed of Yamaguchi, which I know is something that Unseung always looks to do when she plays against Yamaguchi, because she's like, Yamaguchi plays so quickly, can play such a fast pace. If I'm not prepared and ready for that, I'm going to be slightly late on things and I'm just going to have a really bad time of it. So she was definitely up for the battle. And one way she does it is she was very alert. Anytime Yamaguchi played a slightly slower lift or too flat, Unseung jumped on it. Like, was just leaping on things and just pulverizing that. And if I remember rightly, I think she did that against her in a number of other tournaments earlier in the year. Unseung, I thought's control of the front court and the center was also incredibly good. I thought Yamaguchi did pretty well to pull Unseung away from the middle with some really nicely placed clears and those lovely stop drops she's got. But Unseung's ability to pick up those drop shots and play with quality, that was also up from earlier in the week. And I just felt that she was able to kind of control those situations. And then if Yamaguchi, like I said about the lifts, if they weren't good enough, she jumped on it. But if her shots down weren't, Unseung's ability to just hold the center of the court and just to kind of move Yamaguchi around with her control from these areas, when it comes down to a backhand, she does this and she just lifts it, and the quality of it, she was able to just control it and make Yamaguchi work really hard, and Unseung's not really moving too much. Again, in my notes I've got here, this is the best Unseung. I'm talking about the final here, the best Unseung from the whole tournament. Everything I felt before had just been proven wrong. What a beast. because I say that because I did some TikTok lives with the BWF, and I'd also said some things to other people that I had Yamaguchi heading into the final. Yamaguchi as the favourite because she'd played the best badminton throughout the week, and also that Young looked, like I said, looked slightly down, looked like she'd doubted herself. I just thought the way that Yamaguchi was playing, she'd be able to kind of just be the player that could play that pace a little bit too high. If there was any doubts in Young's mind about getting to certain shots or to do this, to do that Yamaguchi would be the player to capitalise on it. But nope, Young, don't know what she did between the semi-finals and finals, but whatever it was, it worked. You've got to respect her. And I've also got to respect Yamaguchi, who was absolutely trying everything. She threw the kitchen sink at Young, but Young had an answer for almost everything. So, second world title, and now I think Jill said that she holds all the majors at once, the Worlds, Asian Games, and the Olympic Games. She just needs to, obviously, defend her Asian Games title and then win the All England next year, and she'll have... For me, I count the All England amongst the majors, and I guess you could call the World Tour Finals too. So, yeah, but still, that's being rather picky. What a fantastic performance from her. Next section, I had PV Sindhu, who wasn't able. She came very close. Well, not to the medal rounds, but came crazy close to beating the player who did make the medal rounds, which was Wang Ziyi. And lost. Yeah, it was a crazy third round match, which ended with Wang Ziyi cramping in both legs, which has proved there's a bit of controversy there. I think I've had some questions about it. I might answer it later on, but there was some words said by Sindhu basically saying if Wang Ziyi actually cramped or whether it was a tactic. I'll answer that now. I don't think it was a tactic. The way that Wang Ziyi moved the next day and the day after, you could still see the residual effects of it. I don't think you can fake cramp quite like that, and I'll be honest, there's been plenty of other matches. I can remember the World Tour Fun against Young, where both players were physically in distress, and Wang Ziyi did all she could to fight through that. She just does not strike me as someone who would use it as a tactic. She was giving her absolute all. It was an absolute brutal match. It happened to like 17 all in the third, or whatever. That was the second time she might have gone down. Yeah, no, I'm not. I don't think it was any sort of tactic, and I think for Sindhu, I think you've got to be very careful about making statements like that. I think it can open yourself up. Like it wasn't as bad, but it reminded me of that whole thing with Marin and basically saying that Li Jiarui faked it at the Rio Olympics, and it turned out that Li Jiarui had torn her ACL. So yeah, I think you've got to be very careful making those statements. And for me, there's been no proof, past or present, to show that Wang Ziyi did that intentionally. There's more of an argument to whether the umpire should have been a little bit stricter on Wang Ziyi, not because cramp is not seen as a medical issue, it's seen as a fitness issue. So whether the umpire should have pulled her up on it a little bit more, got her onto court quickly enough. But then, different umpires are different, but it's difficult because in the human element, when you're an umpire, you can see she's in distress. I know it's the rules, but then again, your human side is like, well, she can't stand up right now. Like, how do you do? I think the ruling needs to. I think maybe it needs to be a little bit clearer. I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. I think that was something that Jill and Steen are wrestling with. But still, I don't think that Wang Ziyi did it as part of any sort of tactic. But moving on from that, I want to kind of highlight some positives when it comes to PV Sindhu. I've mentioned these recently because, she won the Japan Open. She performed well in China, although she possibly should have done a bit better. She should have closed out those match points against Chen Yufei. She did 2 performances in Indonesia and Singapore against the now 2-time world champion An Si-young. And she's continued to build on those. I think, physically she's in fantastic shape. It was a really grueling match against Wang Ziyi, and physically she looked better than Wang Ziyi, which is something that I think in the past sometimes we've seen Sindhu really struggle with these matches and find it difficult. So she's in fantastic shape. I love the reverse kills and the front court stuff in general. That's something I've highlighted before. Her general net game certainly improved, and I think Steen mentioned this. It's her drops and her slices outside of her smashes being high enough quality and sharp enough to really pull an opponent out of position. She's got the thundering smash, but I think in today's game you can't just rely on that. all too much, especially against the top girls, and it's not going to last for too long. You need to be able to play those kind of shots where either because the shots on the back line where the smashes are ineffective, or you're playing in a slightly slower haul, or whatever it may be, being able to play those sharp slices and drop shots to really open up the court to then send your smash. The quality of those definitely got better, or the ability to be able to do it for long periods or to do it over and over, the consistency of it certainly has improved. I pulled into what she said about Wang Ziyi being something you've got to be careful of, but the other thing she said in her post-match interview is that she's not done. She's determined for more, which is absolutely great. And I think if she keeps healthy, continues to develop on the things that she's improved on, then I think women's singles with her in it's going to get really spicy again. It's certainly another style mixed back into the mix, and who's to say that she can't have another really good run at the Asian Games? She got the silver in 2018. Christ, that's a long time ago, where she lost to Jiang. You have to look at her as another potential medal hope there. I think she's not done yet, is PV Sindhu. But it wasn't her that came through. It was the player that defeated her that got the medal, securing her first world medal, actually. And actually, by beating Sindhu, she became the first Chinese player to beat PV Sindhu at a World Championships since Sindhu first played it in 2013. And that is, of course, I'm talking about Wang Ziyi. She showed great grit and determination. And like I said, I put in my notes, I don't think she faked her cramp against Sindhu. I said why is I just don't think she's that kind of person. I just can't see that in her character. I've seen so many other matches where she's, her and Jiang have had some absolute humdingers, some really brutal matches with both players finishing a cramp. And she does her absolute best to hide it and to not let it affect her. I just can't see that being a reason against Sindhu. You could also see in her quarter-final against Line Christoffersen, she was moving so gingerly. Like, clearly the coaches did all they could, or the team did everything to try and flush out her legs and get rid of that cramp and all that lactic acid. But it was, her legs were heavily taped in that quarter-final. But for me, the reason she was able to come through it quite comfortably is that Line Christoffersen really couldn't capitalise. She played too narrow, too floaty, too high, didn't punish the pace. Maybe it was a bit like I said about Jeong. She came up against Wang Ziyi, and maybe the fact that she knew Wang Ziyi was down just made her a little bit more aware of that and changed her style. Maybe the same thing happened to Line Christoffersen, but it wasn't the best of performances from her, because I felt before that maybe she could have had a chance to get amongst the medals. In the semi-final against Jeong, I felt she was still struggling, especially by the end, but it was clear to me that the Chinese team did all they could to get to her as ready as possible, and I'm sure they did absolutely everything. Had she squeaked the first game against Jeong, maybe it'd have been a different story, but she didn't. But still, a medal will mean a lot, but China's search for a women's singles world champion continues. They've not had one since Wang Yihan won in 2011. And funnily enough, to circle it back a little bit to my pick, Wang Yihan was the first Chinese player, that PV Sindhu won against in her huge streak at the World Championships in 2013. Sticking with Chinese players, my pick for the next section was Chen Yifei. I thought she'd have the edge with the draw, and also that, just her experience, but she couldn't make it. She ended up losing to Pornpaway Chochuong of Thailand in the third round, who beat her for the first time in 11 meetings. And actually, Chen Yifei had 4 match points and even had a very healthy lead in the third, but couldn't put away Thailand's Pornpaway Chochuong. It was a really intense match, but I must say, having watched it, I felt Yifei's speed seemed down on usual, as did her ability to sustain speed. But you can't take anything away from Chochuong. So I might as well talk about Pornpaway Chochuong, seeing as she's the player that came through. Actually, lastly about Chen Yifei, I know she's had a number of injury issues this year. She's been constantly fighting to get back into form. We know she had a little bit of a hamstring issue in the last run of tournaments. Maybe just that's why her speed's down. She hasn't had long enough to really get her level up. Every time she gets it up, she seems to get a knockback. So maybe that's why I felt her speed was a little bit down. But anyway, towards Pornpaway Chochuong, who managed to finally get amongst the medals. She's been trying for a long time. And what I really liked about her in terms of especially her match against Chen Yifei, was that when she went up against her, those match points, she wasn't afraid to still go for her winners and her shots. I mean, that is her style. She is a shot maker. And can get drawn into errors, but she didn't lose confidence. And most vividly, she was 21-20 down. She hit a forehand winner down the line, absolutely amazing. At 21 all, she then misses the same shot. And then at 21-22 down, she hit the same shot as a winner again. So yeah, no, that's kind of like showing that, you know, even though she'd missed some of those shots, she still, even at the crunch times and so quickly in succession, was still willing to go for it. And I think that possibly played into her actually winning and making that comeback, is that she was just able to keep going for it. She didn't lose belief in there. Yeah, I said here, Huang had some inspired moments, but she hung really tough at key times. She didn't lose faith in a game. She kept at it, and she was rewarded. It was Chen Yufei who was the one who seemed to fade in the end. So a solid match by Huang. She's always been a talent, but doesn't always get the results that talent warrants. Now, she was, in her next round quarterfinal, she was supposed to face Nozomi Okuhara, who sadly had a knee injury. And so, you know, she had to withdraw, which did gift Huang a place in the semis and amongst the medals. But what was really nice was that when she was interviewed about it, she was massively sympathetic and almost, she said, I'm happy and I'm sad at the same time, because she's happy to be amongst the medals, but sad that my opponent wasn't able to play, because she's a player that's also had numerous injuries throughout her career. So it was quite a nice little touch by Huang. Against Yamaguchi, I think the slight drop in pace she got from Chen Yufei was swallowed by Yamaguchi. You know, Yamaguchi's just, she was playing at an absolute, I was going, outside of the final, I guess, where An was definitely able to match it. Yamaguchi was playing the fastest badminton in women's singles. On top of that, Yamaguchi plays more creatively than Chen Yufei, which is not comfortable for Huang. She can create gaps from nowhere and plays, like I said, at an incredible pace, I think, which is all things that a player like Huang doesn't exactly like playing against. So it was a hard situation for her. There was less gaps for Huang to expose, a much more varied and dangerous attacking game, which again, Huang is a little weak against. I did feel, I've written here at the end, I just didn't get the sense that Yamaguchi was under all too much threat. And that leads nicely into the bottom section, which was my pick at the bottom, the player that got to the final, my favourite player in badminton at the moment, Akane Yamaguchi. She wasn't able to get the record of 4 world titles and take it from Caroline Marin, but she was able to create another bit of history, and that has become the most decorated women's singles world medalist, with now 6, and 5 of those have come from the last 5 world championships. That is incredible consistency. There were 2 other players that could have matched this, and that was PV Sindhu and Chen Yufei, but neither of those 2 were able to make the middle rounds, so Yamaguchi is sitting atop. Absolutely fabulous. I said up into the final, she was a class above everyone that she played. She looked fit, confident, injury-free, and I loved her attacking style. Her movement still bewilders me. But against An Seong, she came against someone who not only was so good at getting back those drops and clears that she was using effectively, the opening shots, the shots that can open the court and create space. An Seong was getting those back with amazing shot quality, but also any loose lifts or loose shots were punished. This is all stuff that I said when I was talking about An Seong. And if Yamaguchi wasn't able to get An Seong off the center, her ability to control from there and hold the central position was just a little bit too much for Akane Yamaguchi. My only hope here for her is that I hope that she continues to stay injury-free over the next 2 years towards the LA Olympics. Because I know the Olympics is something, she's never medaled there. That's the one tournament. I think she has got a medal in the Asian Games, but the one tournament where she hasn't got a medal. And for the most part, it's because usually when she goes into especially into the last 2 Olympics, injuries have always come up. She's never really entered them fully fit like we've seen at a number of the World Championships. So I really hope that she's able to build towards the next Olympics, the next couple of years, and stay injury free. Rounding this out is my dark horse, which was Lena Christophersen. I thought she did good to make it to the quarterfinals, but I've already said she had chances, I felt, to make the medal because, Wang Ziyi, you could see she wasn't going to give up. She was going to fight. She was going to give everything, but you could tell how uncomfortable it was for her to move. But like I said, Christophersen wasn't able to capitalize on that. And I think maybe Christopherson saw this as such a huge opportunity. I said already that how sometimes you play against someone who's down or physically there's clearly a gap. When you know what you need to do, it can just mess with the way that you should play. It just can get in your head a little bit. I think for Christopherson, on top of that, it was also the fact she was in a quarter-final World Championships, and she must have seen herself as having a huge chance of getting a world medal. And I think both those factors just ended up being a little bit too much for her. In terms of my notes from my prediction document, I don't really think there's anything else to add because I think my picks were good here. Yeah, no, not really too much to add from there. I can move on to the last discipline, the men's singles. And again, like the men's doubles. No, men's doubles, I was saved by a dark horse. Men's singles, I got 1 out of 4. And like the men's doubles, I guess, they also lost in the semi-finals. So my top pick was Alwi Farhan. He lost in the quarterfinals to the timeless, the ageless legends that is Chen. But whilst he didn't make the medals and give me a point in this department, I was still really impressed with how he played in his earlier rounds. You know, his victory over Yute Bin in the first round, who was a tricky opponent who was coming in off some really hot form, and a lot of people saw that as a real, kind of potential banana skin for Alwi Farhan, but he came through him pretty convincingly. But it was his win over Ayush Shetty, the Indian, that had beaten the reigning champion, the defending champion, the world number 1, Shi Chi, in the first round. I thought that was absolutely fantastic. You know, not only had Ayush Shetty defeated Shi Chi, but he had the home crowd on his side, which, you know, you could argue maybe put a little bit more pressure onto Ayush Shetty. You know, he just defeated the defending champion, which obviously would have given confidence, but also would have made him think like, okay, maybe this is my year. Maybe I can do this run. And then he came up against Alwi Farhan, who's the same age, who's beaten him a couple of times, who's definitely a tricky opponent, someone who is quite good, I think, at handling tough situations. Maybe it affected Ayush. Maybe that could make the crowd factor somewhat go against him. But get back to Alwi Farhan, I thought he was ultra focused and disciplined throughout this whole tournament. I think he was better in the little pushes, like the small court game. In those early rounds, the conditions were a lot driftier, a lot faster, which I think definitely helps a player like Farhan, who we saw earlier win the Indonesia Masters and the Astora, which is a drifty hall. He'd also done pretty well in the Indonesia Open and the Singapore Open, where he also beat Shi Chi, 2 drifty halls. And it was just those small court games, you know, when you're just on top and you're just doing those little prods and those little pokes. I felt that, you know, I thought Ayush Shetty was absolutely fantastic. He also played the last 2 rallies really well in the first game, where Ayush was hesitant to kill, but the game point with the flick, then dart forward. You know, I think that's the kind of thing that makes him a big player. The way that he closed out the games to do that at that stage was absolutely very, very impressive. I think also for Farhan against Shetty, Shetty's defense against Shi Chi was ultra solid. It was one of the factors I felt that was behind his win. Farhan's attack just was able to break down that defense a little bit more. There was certainly, I think, with Shetty, like I said, a little bit of uncertainty. I think Farhan pressured him to kind of hustled him in a way. You know, you can kind of just the presence there, and the speed was just that little bit higher than Shi Chi, a little bit, maybe a bit of a harder to get a read on him, but whatever it was, he was able to break down Shetty's defense that little bit easier. In the match in the quarterfinal against Chen, there was one thing that, you know, I felt that Farhan looked to get a little bit frustrated in this match. I think he was faulted on his serve a few times, but one thing I felt Chen did really well was by the quarterfinal stage, they'd become kind of, especially playing towards the camera, kind of safe corner in the round the head of right-handers, because it was like the slowest corner. And I think that Farhan was trying to use that corner in that capacity, but I felt that Chen was jumping on that area and closing it down really, really well. He was leaping on them and applying huge pressure to Farhan, a pressure that I felt Farhan couldn't quite handle. He would either like hit it down a line or hit a quick one to the body shot. Just, it was like once you take away a safe corner from someone, it can just open up the game in elsewhere, you know, in other departments. And on top of that, Chen was just playing really, really quick and good badminton. So talking of Chen, he was the player that did come through and make it to the medal rounds. And I felt he was in a good position to reach the final because his opponent, Kodo Naruoka, was someone that he had a pretty good positive head-to-head against. And if he did so, he would have been not just the oldest World Championship finalist, but he would have become the oldest world number one, and actually the first player from Chinese Taipei men's singles to do so. So yeah, no, there's a few things on the line, but sadly he wasn't able to do it. And unfortunately, against Naruoka, he won the first game, and then he absolutely hit a wall. Early in the second game, it was physically, there was clearly something distressing him. I thought I was watching it, and I felt that maybe he was unwell. It looked definitely like more than just a fitness issue, because sometimes with Cho, like, men's singles is tough. We know he's 36 and difficult to maintain that sort of level, and he played some tough matches earlier in the tournament. Nothing like crazy, which makes me even more believe that I think it was something not quite right with him, but it was more the fact that how distressed he looked. I've seen Cho tired, and yeah, he like breathes heavily and stuff, but he can kind of like still stay upright and keep himself composed. There, he was bent over double. He looked pale. He just everything. He looked like there's clearly something wrong. I'm not 100% sure. Maybe it was fatigue of the whole tournament and everything that came with it, but I just felt, that definitely there was something not quite right for him, and that's really what happened. Naruoka wasn't like Naruoka suddenly changed anything. He was just massively helped by the fact that Chen just couldn't play at the pace required to apply enough pressure. But still, what a great tournament for him. His second world medal, and he is still proving age is just a number. I don't know why I ever doubted him. Okay, moving on. Anders Antonsen was my pick in the second quarter. And he lost in the quarterfinals to Naruoka, but I think, in all honesty, he could have lost much earlier. At a bit of an odd tournament. He had a crazy match in the second round against Nat Nguyen of Ireland, where he just got through 21-23, 21-19, 23-21. And that was a really odd match for me, especially the last 5 minutes or so. There was the bit where Antonsen thought Nat was stomping his feet and putting him off, which then that was at like 17-18 or something, and that kind of like threw Antonsen. He lost 2 quick points, and then at 18-20, 2 match points down, he does this into-out return of serve that completely does Nat, but it's called out, and Antonsen goes, well, I might as well challenge this. And what makes it really odd is that I'm pretty sure Antonsen turns around to his coaches and even said to Nat, like, I'm pretty sure that's out. Like, it was almost like you could see it's like, I've lost him out. And he was kind of like expecting to lose. And then it was actually in. The challenge worked. Match continues. They have a few more crazy rallies, and Antonsen somehow pulls out the victory. And it was the longest, as far as I'm aware, I think I saw this stat, the longest World Championship men's singles match since 2005, apparently. So that's pretty crazy. It was really weird, and there was odd mannerisms from Antonsen throughout. There was a thing that even Li Zijia shared. I said this in the fan site thing yesterday. It was like a rally where he dived it and it ended up on the floor, and then he does this weird kind of like backhand smashy where he jumped like a bit of a fairy, like this. It was absolutely weird, but he was doing that kind of throughout the whole event. So he didn't look comfortable on court. He looked like he was lacking his timing in the rear courts. There didn't seem many 2-4 smashes, which I know that's something that Antonsen has sometimes been can do, and it's something I think Steen Pedersen has said a few times that sometimes he uses too many like just the slices and the half smashes. It needs to be a little bit more power in his game, but it just seemed to be just didn't quite have that full court game. Even in his first round against Pangetsu of Azerbaijan, in the end it just looked like, okay, I can't really do much. I don't look too comfortable. I'm just going to run the guy, which means basically I'm just going to play long rallies. I'm not really going to go anything, and I know that fitness-wise I'm going to win it, and that's kind of what happened. Pangetsu hit a wall pretty quickly. I don't think he's used to playing quite at that level. I actually think, to be fair, Antonsen did pretty well to get to the quarterfinals, but it was the first time that he had made the quarters of the world and didn't progress. Against Naruoka, it was actually probably his best match, but I think he missed a number at the end of the game, missed a number of those key round the head cross smashes, which is usually his preferred shot. I know that was playing into the drift, but he missed a few of those. And I thought that Naruoka was actually also, for me, blending his retrieval game with his attacking counter punch style quite nicely. Whilst I felt Antonsen was playing his best badminton in that quarterfinal compared to the rest of the tournament, I know Naruoka got to the final, but that match probably was also Naruoka's best match. I didn't see much of his match against Feng where he made a comeback, but I thought Naruoka actually was blending his game pretty well. And talking of Naroka, I'll get onto him, is I think maybe Naroka was riding high because of the round before. He played Li Shifeng and he was 13-5 down, and then managed to come back, and he survived it. Sometimes when you have that sort of win, that match, you do play a lot better the next day. I can recall him from my own career. I remember a tournament in Slovakia where this is a bit of a weird tangent, but I can remember being the number 2 seed, and in the course there, this Danish guy who was good, but I should have beaten him quite easily, and I managed to scrape it through like 21-18, and I don't even know the score, but it was like one of those. It was a gritty performance that wasn't particularly nice to watch or good. And then the next round in the semi-finals, which was later that evening, because in EBUs or European tournaments you tend to play 2 matches in a day, I came back and played a guy that was much better, much higher ranked, and I beat him like 10-10, and I played so much better because I'd got through such a scrappy match. It just, for some reason, just lifted my game, and possibly that's what happened to Naroka. He was staring defeat in the face, somehow managed to come through, and then he played much better against Anderson. But he definitely was helped by the fact that Anderson, I think, was never truly too comfortable out there in India at this tournament. But talking of Naroka, for me, I've referenced this fan site live thing I did. It is up on YouTube if you want to watch it. It's the first section I was given the men's singles to talk about, and it said before on air, like, oh, we want to make sure there's a hot take. And I was like, crap, I didn't really had a hot take for men's singles. And also a hot take is something you say before. But anyway, I came up with one, but I didn't manage to say it. So actually here, I can say it here. My hot take was actually that Naroka was the most unexpected finalist out of all the finalists. I think what do you think? Is that a hot take or not? Is it one that you agree with? That even though he'd been in the world final before, and there were quite a number of players and pairs that were making their first appearance in a final, a lot of them, I think that Naroka making the final was the most unexpected player to do so, to make the final. I don't think he's the most unexpected semi-finalist, but out of the people that made the finals, for me, most unexpected. Is that a hot take or not? Let me know. But yes, he did reach his second world final. I felt he played his best against Anna's. Versus Cho Chen, he was helped by Cho Chen, not at 100%. But in the final, he was outclassed by Alex Lanier. I did feel that when he played that match, maybe it was because the conditions were definitely getting slower as the week went on, which, as I noticed that, I was like, okay, we might see Naroka go for the grind fest. And maybe he felt that Alex Lanier had also had 2 hard matches before against Kunlevert and Victor Lai. Especially Victor Lai was a really brutal semi-final, that maybe he felt, okay, I can beat Alex if we go toe-to-toe like 2 boxers just trading punches. I'm going to come out on top. I don't know why you'd think that against Lanier for someone who's so physically strong, but I don't know. That's the only way I can explain the way that Naroka played. He had odd moments where he went on the offensive a little bit in the second and the first half of the first game, and I think the midway point of the second, but really he just got dragged into just his usual defensive style, and Lanier was far too on it and far too strong for that. He was, like I said, outclassed by Lanier. But still, I think reaching the final, it's a huge result for Kota Naroka, and I'll repeat it again, I think the most surprising finalist on finals day. Moving on, my next pick was the one player that came through for me, my good friend, guy I interviewed before the tournament. Thank you, Victor Lai. Not an easy path, but I felt his demeanour on court was really good throughout. He has that calmness about him that I think makes him seem built for these big occasions. Or should I say, I think he can consistently perform on the big stages. I still feel that when it comes to like being calm and being able to consistently bring big performances at the biggest tournaments, I know he didn't win this tournament. That was Alex Lanier. I still think he is actually the best player in the world at the moment in that. He's still the most consistent. He reached the semi-final of the All England. Sorry, that was my front doorbell. So I was saying he reached the semi-finals of the All England. He won the Indonesia Open, semi-finals of the China Open, now semi-finals of the World Championships. So I think when it comes to, there's not many players at that level in the men's singles that are consistent. We talk about men's singles being so open and so diverse and having so many different winners, and that's true. It's World Championships once again kind of prove that. But when it comes to like consistently making the latter stages, I think Victor Lai is is the most consistent. And his steadiness, I think, in the match against Lo Qinyu, he quelled the ever-dangerous Lo Qinyu, who played his usual game, dipping in and out of brilliance and focus. He just couldn't sustain a clear game plan to really punish Victor. And then I felt that Victor also showed that same sort of calmness against Rasmus Gemke in the quarters. Rasmus having an absolute blinder of a tournament, beating Lin Chunyi in the second round and then beating Jonathan Christie, the new world number 1, in the third round. You know, absolutely amazing. A player, he was having the tournament of his life. He did look, I think Gemke did look a little bit spent by the end, but was riding high. And Victor was trailing throughout the entirety of that first game, but Victor Lai stayed calm, he kept it close, and he snuck it, and then he kept himself ahead in the second game. Actually, was he behind? Am I thinking of the Lo Qinyu match where he was behind for most of it? I might be misremembering, I might be confusing the two, but regardless, it was still a calm and steady performance. In the semi-final, I mentioned this a bit earlier, that he admitted that the drift had played a role because it had changed. When he got the choice of ends, he thought he was choosing the faster end, the more difficult end, so that he would end on the slower end. So he was wanting to be the far end, but that ended up being the slower end. So it was a little easier for him to control his backcourt and stuff, and he managed to win the first game against Lanier, but then it got a little bit more difficult towards the end. So yeah, no, it kind of, sometimes, I mean, I don't think that's him making an excuse. I think he would still admit that Alex played a brilliant match, but ends, especially for the singles players, can be such a difficult thing. Yeah, and also I said like the slower end at when he had to play the end of the match on the I guess the faster end, so the slower end for Lanier. That round, the corner that was safe one, I mentioned it earlier about Chochi and Chen covering against Farhan, is that round the head one. It is a really hard corner to deal with if it can be peppered. And if it's peppered with the right height, that's where Farhan didn't quite get it right. A bit too flat. Cho could leap on it. Alex played with just the right height where it was fast enough, but high enough that you couldn't jump on it. You had to move, and it was making that big long movement and then recovering out of it time and time and time again. Physically really, really difficult, especially if you add to that that Victor was playing on the faster end where he couldn't really probably clear it all too much. The only clear option he got was a high round the head, like a diagonal one, a cross-court one, which gives Alex a little bit more time. So it made Alex's court a little slower or a little bit easier and just a much harder time for Victor Lai to deal with. So you did, I mean, in the third, I think you saw Victor try to go on the attack a little bit more because of that. But he just couldn't sustain it. Lanier's defence was up to task, and he was as great as he had been all week. And I put here in my notes, there's a fantastic match for Lanier. The ends really helped, but also his tenacity paid off. I heard this, I think, a joke that someone said that in the French badminton that Alex spends too much time on physical training, even though he's such a physical beast. I'd say that, you know, in this sort of situation, it kind of proved how important it was to be physically so strong. It kind of did come down to physical, and the final, in a way, kind of did as well. Although it didn't go on long enough for it to be, but just you'll get what I mean when I get to talking about Alex. But quite funny that, you know, he'd been, you know, pulled into question his use of time in the gym and getting physically strong, when actually that was something that played a huge role in him becoming world champion. But a great week for Victor Lai. You know, last year, he got to a bronze medal in the Worlds, but he was the underdog playing with zero pressure. This year, I know that it was different for him. He tried to go in not seeing himself as a favourite, but it would have been difficult because a lot of people were seeing him as a favourite. I certainly did, hence why I picked him. And there's no way that he could play with that same sort of freedom as he did the year before. And he had some tricky rounds, and he dealt with them really amicably and well. And his versus Alex's match in the semis was a fabulous men's singles. Two 21-year-olds, we might see plenty more battles between those two in the future. So to go back-to-back at the Worlds and get 2 bronze medals, absolutely brilliant stuff from the Canadian. So moving on, the bottom part. Yeah, so this is the last one. My pick was Christo Popov. And that obviously didn't quite go to plan, as he lost in his first match to Kenta Nishimoto. I always thought that was when you looked at the draw, I remember even when I said I picked Christo, I said that, you know, he's got a difficult route. His section of the draw, I think even someone else said it to me, that out of all the draws, and I think even I said this is the most difficult section. There was so many banana skins, and sadly for him, he fell in the first one. You know, I felt that against Nishimoto, who's always a dangerous player, The pressure of the situation, I thought, for me, Christo looked very nervous, so lots of emotion shown. And actually, it reminded me, just coming to my head again, when I watched that match, when I was at the Thomas Cup finals, his first match, so when France played Thailand, he came up against Kunluk and I was sat there in the crowd, and it was quite a small arena, so I was really close up, and you could see Christo breathing really heavily. And it's not a fitness thing, because it's like a mid-game interval in the first, but he was breathing so hard, and it was that kind of that nervousness, and you can get tired really quickly if you're nervous. It can just exacerbate things, and if you can get through that, sometimes you can actually find your second win pretty quick and settle. For me, if you watch it back, there were some tough rallies, but Christo was that same sort of heavy breathing. Like it was that nervous tiredness, that nervous fatigue that was definitely coming. His feet weren't moving as well. He was getting a lot back, but he was having to dive for more shots than was diving for shots that he usually with his speed cover without. He just struck me as someone whose feet weren't moving particularly well. He just looked heavy. There were definitely moments where he felt like he was getting control of the match, but it just was never too far away. Nishimoto stuck with him enough where, that... No, I'm going ahead of myself. That, it just made the situation very, very difficult for him. And I felt that another area that came across was Christo attacked too often with like the full arm. We always talk about the singles having the quick, short reaction, the quick action so that you can maintain your body balance, you can be more accurate, and you can get onto the follow. Christo, too many times when you're nervous, you're less likely that you're going to go all in, and he just wasn't following it up at the front, or he's late at the front. He almost managed to scrape it through his just good scrapping back and defensive game, but it obviously wasn't to be. And I have to admit, I quite like the way that Nishimoto won with the flick serve, because Christo really wasn't liking those. So for me, overall, he lost because he just couldn't get his nerves and frustrations fully under control. But for France, anyway, the player that came through and ended up winning the whole thing was Alex Lanier, the first French men's singles medalist, and of course the first French men's singles world champion. He looked super solid for me from round one to the final. Like Christo, he had a difficult draw. I'd say Victor Lai tested him the hardest. Kunluk also tested him, but tested him in a more of a mental way. Alex was controlling the first game against Kunluk, but Kunluk managed to nick it and then went 11-3 up, but Alex stuck in there, showed great resolve. From that point on, he was in complete control of the match. And I think Kunluk's physicality, or lack of, just came to the forefront a little bit there. The funny thing, I've here in my notes that I'm pretty sure at the All England, I did a preview and I picked Alex Lanier to do over Christo. And Alex then lost first round, and Christo had a pretty decent run. And then this time I've gone the other way around. And actually, for another time, I mentioned the fan site live. Is that again? That was something that Tommy Fuchs mentioned. He's like, it's really funny how like when Alex is at the higher one in the rankings, and all the attention on him, it helps Christo. And then vice versa, when it's Christo who's ahead, like now, it's Alex that then kind of benefits a little bit from having slightly less attention on him. So it's quite interesting. That'd be actually quite interesting to see if that kind of trend continues throughout their career. But yeah, no, a great tournament, obviously, for Alex Lanier. What a fantastic performance, I think he's the only European player outside of Denmark to have won the men's singles, and it was just a fantastic tournament. His attack was sublime. I think it's not just become more layered, but it's so much sharper and far more accurate. I loved his controlling, neutralising shots in around the head corner too, which came handy in much the later stage when the playing conditions became a lot slower. But in the earlier rounds, when the conditions were playing a little faster, a little drifty, a little bit more awkward, I think he showed more of those improvements that his coach, Kęstutis Navickas, had spoken about when he won Singapore. And I said that that's where his game in the Danish court, where he's pushing up the little pokes of the body, the jump outs, the ability to play and create space on a much smaller court, I think came to the forefront here. And I spoke, I don't know where I spoke about this, but Victor Lai, maybe in an earlier round, it might have been in my notes actually, had trained at NTT East, where he trained with Momoto. And when I spoke to Victor about that, he said that Momoto, they do a lot of those kind of games, those small court games, and Momoto's ability to kind of still make you feel like you're moving on the full court when he's just got this like 2/3 court available to him. And it's definitely helped him. Alex Lanier has gone to NTT East for the last 3 years. Clearly, he's learnt a thing or two from that. And I also think his training with Anders Antonsen, who's another player who's very good at doing that side of things. I think he's picked up a lot of things from these different players, and as well as his coaching team and everyone behind him, clearly keeping him on the front foot. But yeah, I think I spoke about that, but then again, in the semi-final and final, his more physical open style worked well. And yeah, no, he was just absolutely brilliant. He had a difficult first round, had been asking against Panitchaphon Tanaka, came through him very comfortably. Mrs. Zilberman first round, then Panitchaphon, who I thought was one of my dark horses, and he came through him very comfortably. Then he beat Unkarlong Angus, who's again awkward, a player who beat Nishimoto, who had beaten Christo. Then he beat the 3-time finalist and former champion Kunle-Vitasan, who yes was a little bit down, but just was always dangerous and had come into that match fresh. I think like I said, being a game in 11-3 down, he showed great resolve. And then the semi-final against Victor Lai, it was a real physical battle and a mental one. And he didn't get the best of starts, but he stuck to his game plan and he just was able to play the conditions a little bit better than Victor Lai. And then in the final against Kodai Naraoka, he's completely outclassed Naraoka in all disciplines. Outside the first few rallies where the obvious nerves, I thought for that match I did actually have Alex as the slight favourite because I thought he was playing better badminton throughout the week compared to Naraoka. But I thought maybe what might even that is the fact that Naraoka's played a world final before, which is quite a big thing. And you saw that a little bit in the real early stages, but there was a moment where suddenly Alex has started to play with real freedom. He stepped forward onto things. His attack was just patient, accurate, powerful. And like I said, Naraoka was playing that kind of like drawn out style. And Alex was quite happy to go with that. He kept his patience. But then for me, what was crazy was like they sometimes have like a really long rally. And even from the back line, Alex was like, nah, this, and jump smash, bang, bang, and would win it. It actually, I said this on the fan site live, that his performance in that final and how good he was, it was more like how he took apart a player and how he couldn't put a foot wrong, reminded me of Victor Axelsen's semi-final in 2017 against Chen Long. Victor's destruction of Chen Long in that semi-final against Chen Long, who was the defending Olympic champion and 2-time world champion, was more devastating. But it was I was watching that going, this is reminding me of that. Just, he can't put a foot wrong. He's just playing like so free. He looks so happy on court, so controlled. He's hitting winners almost when he wants to. He's got the game plan. And his opponent just looks like he's got absolutely no solution. It was just absolutely brilliant. So what a fantastic day rounding out for France, though. My God, brilliant. So I guess the last thing to go through, I had two dark horses for singles. Obviously, I've already kind of mentioned Panitchaphon Tanaka, who lost to the eventual champion Lanier. I thought that it maybe not a good performance, but from him. But in all honesty, Alex was just on a whole different level. My other one was Yushi Tanaka, who had a great opening round win over Wang Hongyang, who was seeded. That was a great win, but then he lost to Chen, who was playing really, really good badminton. So lastly, I got my notes, my prediction document. I said here for Xiu Qi, experience, hasn't got wins, but still looked okay. I feel his focus is the Worlds and Asian Games, so he is building. And I put here, Ayush is a big test, and there's a big test that he sadly failed. For me, Chochi and Chen is the only other one I had here. Will come in full of confidence as China, but my question mark was, can he sustain it? I'd love to see him medal again, but a tough section full of young, fast guys with good attacks, which can dampen Cho's own attacking style. I did say here, a potential Xiu Qi hurdle will be hard. I'm not sure if he is to play Xiu Qi, you can do it again, but I said he will probably hope for Xiu Qi to lose before, which obviously he did. And in terms of the young guns being able to dampen him with their attack, I'd say that he went on the attack first. Offense is sometimes the best defense, and he definitely showed that. For the next one, I had Anna's here, but I've also got Kodai was actually part of my section. And I said here, I'm putting my money on Kodai because of his experience. His level recently is higher than Li Shifeng. And with Li Shifeng, you just don't know what you're going to get. So obviously Li Shifeng almost beat Kodai, but Kodai, it's hard to back him. I just hope Kodai comes out with the attacking plan or at least play fast. If not, then he will F my prediction. I think he actually did do that. He did come up fast enough. with a bit of an attacking plan. I think that plan went out the window in the final, but maybe he didn't feel he was strong enough for it, or he felt the conditions might suit him, or whatever. I don't know what happened in that final. He did a little bit the same in the semi-final, was helped slightly by Chen knocking it down, being looking a bit unwell. Alex wasn't going to give him the same luxury. But still, I did actually mention Kodai in my prediction for the next one. I have Victor, but I had Lin Chunyi. There'll be some doubts. And I said I did think Asian Games is where he might be back in all England shape, but I think I'll have to go for him. But obviously, he wasn't in Asian Games shape. He lost to Rasmus Gemker, and actually saying that he's not in full shape kind of was part of the reason he lost to Gemker. I don't think he was able to sustain his level high enough or long enough. You can see him fading. He was not able to follow up his attacks and do the kind of things that we know that he's good off. But you have to give credit to Gemker, who's having an absolutely phenomenal week. And then in the bottom bit, really, it's that, funnily enough, in the bottom bit, I've got 3 players here, none of which were Alex Lanier. So I didn't even consider Alex. I probably should have done. But yeah, finally, we've got through my predictions. I've been speaking for just over, I've got 2 hours, 11 minutes on the clock. There'll probably be a little bit of cutting time, but I can't imagine I'll cut too much. And I guess I'll take this moment to say, I do apologise there's not too much footage. These videos take a long time. If I was to edit them all with footage, it would just take far too long. It is just me. So I do apologise for the basic things. I think for these really long ones, I think I'm just going to keep it as simple as I possibly can. But I said, okay, before I got into your like I said at the start, before we get onto your Q&A, I've got a couple of sections here. First one is upset/surprises, great tournament runs that I've not spoken about before. Kind of touched on it. The first one on my list is Ayasheti beating Xiu Qi in the first round. It's a huge upset. There were a lot of Indian fans, especially on my Instagram and here on YouTube, saying that Ayash will beat Xiu Qi, and he did. I had a couple of people saying, "Oh, your predictions are wrong, bro. Your predictions are wrong." And I was like, "What prediction? I never said that Xiu Qi was my pick. My pick from that section, if you remember rightly, was Alwi Farhan, who also didn't make it, but that's besides the point. I actually did say in my prediction, I actually said in my video that I felt Xiu Qi might fall before the early rounds. So there were a number of players that had the potential to do it, with Ayash being one of them. For me, Ayasheti, it was an interesting match. He almost let it slip, didn't he? In the third game, Xiu Qi was massively down, like 15-6, I think. And then he was 20-15 and he saved 4 match points. I have to say, great resolve from Xiu Qi, but it was Ayasheti's defense that I think was an absolute crucial part. We always link Ayasheti more with the attacking game, being 6'4" or 6'5", being so tall. But his defensive capabilities in that match especially were absolutely phenomenal. And I'm pretty sure I've seen an Instagram video where someone translated Xiu Qi and Sunjun, his coach's break, and I'm pretty sure it was Xiu Qi saying that he's feeling far too much pressure from the defensive game. I might be just slightly misremembering that, but I'm pretty sure I am remembering that correctly. And that I definitely would agree with that testament that Ayasheti was very difficult for Xiu Qi to break down. I definitely would say that Xiu Qi's not 100% yet, but he also admitted afterwards that that's no reason as to why he lost. He lost to the better player. Ayasheti defeating Xiu Qi was a huge upset and a huge surprise. Well, more of an upset, I'd say, than a surprise. Next one would have to be Garrett Tan of the USA, 18-year-old, beating Lakshya Sen in the second round. I think many people, myself included, was seeing Lakshya Sen potentially getting through his bit, at least getting towards the quarterfinals, because he had his seed. I think I even said this, that bottom section really is only going to be between Lakshya Sen and Kundavat Vititsan. But I knew nothing about Garrett Tan, in all honesty, and I think that's pretty understandable. He's 18, he's from America. Haven't really seen him on the world tour. I think even in the match against Lakshya, it was Gillenstein, and they'd both not really seen too much of him. But yeah, no, what an absolutely fabulous match from him. His attacking play was absolutely brilliant. There are a lot of comparisons between him, and Chen or Li Zijia because of the amount of huge smashes that he played. But I think on top of that, not only did he attack well, I thought he played the net really well. There were a number of times where he made some errors or he got faulted, where he tried to kill it on the net, just to apply that pressure there to Lakshya so there was no area, because he has such a big attack that if he'd let the front court game too open, Lakshya probably would have just been able to just control and prod it around the net and not really have to give away too many lifts. But because he played the net, I thought really well. Lakshya then had to play the backcourt and it just fed into his attacking game. It was a fantastic win for Gayatri. Physically, pretty impressive that he was able to maintain that game. He obviously couldn't maintain it the next day when he lost to Kunovitasan. He was physically drained. He told that to me himself, as well as saying it in interviews. Next one, I kind of touched on it as well, is Rasmus Gemke's run to the quarterfinal, beating Lin Chunyi, beating Jonathan Christie as well, and then pushing Victor Lai hard. What a fantastic tournament for him. If you think there was a lot of talk about Jolly and Gayatri Gopichan obviously getting a medal, but with Jolly's injury being around the Asian Championships, they didn't travel to the Uber Cup either. Rasmus Gemke also at the Thomas Cup had to withdraw. He had a last-minute replacement for him because of injuries, and we know that he's had a lot of injury issues as well in the past. So for him to have such a fantastic tournament and reach the quarters, hats off to him. Another Dane that I've got here. It's not really an upset or a surprise. It'll go, I guess, maybe, and that was Mia Blichfeld's return. She beat Supanida Thong of Thailand in I can't remember if it was second or first round. But yeah, no, the reason I mention that is because she hadn't played a competitive tournament since the Uber Cup because of her knee issues. And even at the Uber Cup, she didn't really play all too much and couldn't play at her full level. She'd been struggling for a long, long time. So it's good to see her back. We hope to see her on the World Tour a little bit more. The last three on this list I've all mentioned, which is Gayatri and Teresa Jolly and their heroic medal run. Two French pairs in the final of the World Champs and two French pairs. A French pair and a French singles player. Three French players, let's play in the final, but also winning. Absolutely historic for French badminton. And then lastly is Aaron Chana-Suryik's final tournament question mark, but we're not so sure. Okay, last one. My favourites or most memorable matches. This isn't a full list, but just ones that came to my mind. Anders Andersen versus Nat Nguyen. PV Sindhu versus Wang Ziyi. Ai Shetty versus Shi Yuqi. Syahnawi and Marwah versus Feng and Zhong Dongping, the semi-final from the mixed doubles. Garrett Tan and Lakshya Sen. Pornpoi Chochuang versus Chen Yufei was absolutely brilliant. Alex Lanier versus Victor Lai, semi-final. That was some brilliant men's singles badminton. And the men's double semi-final, Kimono Sosajay versus Aaron Cha and Sohyik. There were many others. That's not the complete list, but just the ones that came off the top of my head. Right, Q&A. Now, usually when I do a Q&A, I also make some notes on it to give me some talking points, but I've just realised that I haven't done that. So this is going to go completely off the top of my head. Some of this I might be repeating myself, but these are the questions I've picked. There's 11. Whether I'll answer them all, we'll see. What's the different tactic Aaron Chana-Suryik used between Kim Won-ho and Seo-Sun-jae versus Liang Weikang and Wang Chang? Why the performance dropped dramatically in the final match? Is that really a curse? I'm not really quite sure. Is the curse relating to the fact that pretty much most Malaysians that make the final lose? Because, Aaron Chana-Suryik were the only Malaysian players to have won a world medal. Everyone else that's made major finals, including the Olympics, have lost. I'm not sure if that's the curse that you're relating to, but there wasn't really a tactic change from Aaron Chana-Suryik, in all honesty. You could see they were trying to do the same things, like I mentioned before, trying to, if they're on defence, have a solid defence and turn it, always looking to press. Aaron Cha was looking to really dive on the front court, or into the mid-court, sorry. Suryik was trying his best when he was brought to the front to be as solid as he could to challenge the net. But they were just outclassed. Like I said, against the Koreans, they were able to win the service situation, win the 50-50 game, change defence into attack, pull and twist and turn and create gaps on the opponent's side. All those things they were able to win against the Koreans, but against the Chinese, zero chance of doing that. The Chinese were doing what like I said earlier. The Chinese did to the Malaysians what the Malaysians did to the Koreans. So it's not really a tactic that was different. Aaron Chana-Suryik would have gone with the same tactic. Maybe there might have been a slightly different thing, but really, Liang and Wang, just every department that the Malaysians possibly could get ahead in, the Chinese. And maybe that is why the Chinese have a good head-to-head record against the Malaysians. Sticking with the Malaysians, do you think after the tournament, Aaron Chana-Suryik should split? And how will this affect the restructuring of the other men's doubles pairs in Malaysia, given they have so many good pairs if they want a chance to win if they want a chance to win gold for LA 2028. Now, do I think they should split? I already answered this question somewhat before this tournament, and I said that I don't think they should split. I think now I definitely would agree. I would stick with that assessment. I think Aaron Chan and Soo Yik, they played together for so long. Not to say that they can't be successful with other pairs. You know, they both had some pretty good success actually in their little tournaments before this. You know, Aaron with Aaron Tai and Man Wei Chong and Soo Yik did pretty decent, although I had kind of questioned that pair and their potential for success long term. I still kind of believe that. But I think with Aaron Chan and Soo Yik, they've played together for so long. You know, they've been friends beforehand. They've had so much success. And they've proven again that even without too much preparation time together, they can still come back and pull off these fantastic performances at the Worlds. I just think it'd be silly to split them and start something new. I think there's more scope for the Malaysian coaches to split Man and T and then the young pair of Aaron Tai and Kang Kai Shing. I know you got Arif and Yap Roy King. So there's 6 players potentially that you could mix and match and maybe try and find something from there. But I think I personally would leave Aaron Chai and Soo Yik alone. I can't remember off the top of my head how old Man Wei Chong and T Kai Wen are. I would believe off the top of my head they're a bit younger than Aaron Chai and Soo Yik. They've definitely not been around as long. So I think if you're looking for future and then even possibly beyond LA, those are the 6 players I mentioned. They're also younger, so they've got a little bit more. There's experiments to be made. So yeah, no, I would personally leave Aaron and Soo Yik together and mix around with the other 6. Question 3: has men's singles techniques reached its limit? Hence why everyone's level is super close. It's quite an interesting question, that. And I wish I had spent more time to think of it to give you a really good breakdown answer. Maybe it's something you need to really look at for like its own video, where you really need to sit down and do that. I think what's happened with the men's singles, and it's happening with all the disciplines, is that you hear this being, when it comes to, say, for reference it to men's doubles, is that you can't have a clear front and back. You can, but the clear front player needs to get good at the back, and the clear back player needs to get good at the front. Mixed doubles, we're seeing it, the women need to be able to handle their own at the back much more, and the pairs can work in their opposite formations. Even women's doubles, you can't just, although we had a pair win quite reliably on their defense mainly, I still see overall you've got to have every department covered, and that's something I hear constantly. Women's singles, the pace is going up crazy level. You can't be just a retriever. You can't just be an attacking player. You can't just have creative winning shots. Like we mentioned with Sindhu, she can't just bludgeoningly use her big smash and basic net. Now she needs to be a little more creative. She needs to be able to play the slices. She needs to be able to do the deceptive reverse slices from the kills. All these things. And I think men's singles tends to be a little bit, I guess the men's ones is always more at the forefront, and then you see the women's game start to become a little bit more like the men's game of old, and then they catch up. But has it reached its limit? I don't think it has. I think there's certainly more limits or if there, we might think we've reached the limit, but then the new limit's always going to then push people to go above it. I wouldn't be surprised. We say that the men's singles level is incredibly close, and it is. And even I think Victor Lai said in the statement, I don't think we're going to see dominant players like your Lee Chong-weis and Lin Dan's. I would argue that you can never really truly say that, because whilst everyone is super close, there's nothing to say that there could be a player who's either playing now or we don't know of that's going to bring something completely new and just dominate. It's a lot harder because the depth, I think, is there, and also because of that, and everyone needs to have so much more rounded games. You've got to have your defense got to be just as insane as your attack. Everyone's going to have slight areas where they're slightly better, but you've got to kind of tick all the boxes. You've got to have all the infinity rings or all the Dragon Balls, all that stuff. But there's not to say that there's going to be one player who, say, whereas before you might have one department that's so good that it kind of redefines it. What's to say there's a player that's going to say that I'm not going to, there's definitely 5 areas of men's singles, but just say there are 5. Whereas before, maybe a player coming along and having one ridiculous one makes them ultra dominant. What's to say there's not going to be a player that does 3 of them? There could be someone that we just don't know. So I think it's always difficult to say there can't be someone that could just come around and be absolutely out and out dominant. Difficult to see because of how good everyone is. And I would say actually this question, it shows that all the departments of singles, the levels have just gone up and up and up. Everything now needs to be covered. There can't be one hole in your game. If there is, it's going to get punished and it's going to get exploited. But then I would also just finish by saying I don't think it's just men's singles that we're seeing that in. Next question: what's going on with Kim Won-ho and Seo Jae? Title drought since the Asian Championships is a bit concerning in brackets for them. What's going on with them? I don't really know. Like, I don't think they're still. Again, they still medalled at these World Championships. I still think they had a pretty good tournament per se. They beat some difficult pairs and beat them convincingly, but they came up against a pair again. Whenever they've been beaten, and yes, this is one of their heaviest defeats, I would say, Aaron Chan So-yik. But you would always then go, the pair that beat them were absolutely firing. Aaron Chan So-yik's best performance in the whole tournament. Whilst I think they still brought the similar level to the final, they were just outclassed by an even better pair. Was that semi-final against the Koreans? And actually, it was a really nice match. I kind of made it out like the Koreans were outclassed in every department and they were losing their position. Their speed was down. There was still some really good stuff from them. So I don't think we should really kind of go, what's going on with them? They've suddenly fallen off. I think what's happened is, and what always happens is they came out, they got so dominant, so good, that it's brought the level up of everyone else. You know, like always going to happen. You get a dominant player or dominant pair. It might take a little bit of time to see it, but it raises the level of everyone else. And we're starting to see it. So, and I think it's come at the right time because we're going to go into next year into the Olympic qualification. We now can see that with Kim Won-ho and Seo Jae not winning everything and lots of different pairs winning or having the ability, that suddenly men's doubles is suddenly interesting again. But I think for Kim Won-ho and Seo Jae, the last thing I would say is Kim Won-ho's knee clearly was a little bit affecting him, and I think Seo Jae covered it pretty well, but just they looked a little bit off in terms of their speed in certain things. But I have no doubt that, again, they're a world-class pair. Whenever you see a pair like this or a player having a slight downtime, and by down for them it is, then they're not winning the tournament, they're only getting to the semis, that they've got that class about them. They were both individually good before they became a pair, and they've become a phenomenal pair, that they could very easily suddenly get another run and suddenly start to win lots and lots of tournaments again. Okay, question 5. Your thoughts on Teresa Joly and Gayatri Gopichan's performance? How far can they go? I've already kind of touched on their performance throughout. A lot of it really inspired play. I absolutely love Teresa Joly. I mentioned before I've seen her at the BXL and I know what she's capable of, and I've seen them play at the All England Live and stuff, and definitely both of them are phenomenal players. How far can they go? For me, with them, sky's kind of the limit. They can definitely be, they've got a world bronze, it's going to give them huge confidence. It's always going to be injuries for them, because I mentioned that ligament tear in the ankle for Joly, but before then, Jolly's had shoulder issues, Gayatri's had back issues. Those kind of injuries that I think I've also seen multiple times come back. I mentioned the BXL. I spoke to Joly, Teresa, and I remember speaking to her going like, why aren't we seeing you more on the World Tour? What's going on? She was like, Gayatri's injuries keep coming back. So clearly there's a little bit of fragility when it comes to their robustness in terms of their injury things. But if they can stay injury-free and build on it, before their ranking is at 39, but it was 9 in the world. They were top 10. I think what they've shown and some of the improvements, in their reverse formation, again, leading to that question about the men's single, I said how it's in all disciplines. Teresa also said about how she's trying to learn to be a little bit calm and not so pumped up, which she showed in patches at the tournament, but understandable, home world championships. So how far can they go? They can win big tournaments. They are that kind of pair. But I've been saying that about them ever since I saw them reach the All England semi-finals a couple of years ago. So they haven't quite pushed on to that, but if they can, that's mainly, I think, because of injury issues that keep flaring up. So hopefully their robustness and their ability to stay injury-free, that's going to be the big determining factor. But then again, big determining factor for a lot of players. What do you think? Next question. What do you think Victor Lai was missing or could have done to win his semi-final? Had the drift be on his side, so that when he picked it, he would have been... Jokes aside, though, joking aside, I think the end definitely played a factor. The fact that he had to... he ended up playing on the faster end of the final half, which doesn't play into his good game. someone I know the commentators was saying that he's one of those players that can, even in these difficult conditions, fast ones, he can still play really well because he's got such a nice control of the shuttle. But for me, and I think he would know this, he's always said that when I spoke to him, it was his physicality and his attacking game, or his ability with the physical to maintain an attacking game. I still think there's plenty more room within this attacking game to be able to improve. I also think when it comes to, this is a really finicky part. He's got some really nice deceptions and he can do some really big movements and still play a very tight shot. But if he could do those with a slightly sharper action at the net on top, I think maybe that could be an area he could improve on. But overall, it's going to be, I think he still needs to get physically stronger. Like, he's improved that so much, but I still feel there's plenty more room to grow in that. And I think adding maybe a few more attacking options. He's got some, it's not like he's got a poor attack. Let's not be honest. I already said, to be good in men's singles, to be world class like he is, you need to have everything covered anyway. But if you had to be really, at that level, you've got to be really, really finicky. I think just adding a little bit more physical power to his game would be that, and maybe a little bit better with the deceptive shots back to the net. Two more. Is Shiuchi's form declining fast? I would get that. He's now no longer the number one. He's dropped down to number 6. He's definitely at the moment not qualified for the World Tour Finals. He'd have to really pull it out of the bag, I think, to get into that, especially with how competitive the men's singles is. Hasn't won a tournament for a while. He did win the Asia Championships, I think was his last tournament. But he pulled out some good performances, I thought, at the Thomas Cup. I know he's been struggling with injuries and some issues. And again, quick side note, sorry the camera's gone really dark. It's because I've been recording for so long. The sun in England has gone down. That's how long I've been talking for. And I think I've put a light on, it'll be too glary. But anyway, back to the question. Is he declining fast? I actually don't think he's declining. I think he's declining if you look at his absolute peak, which maybe was last year. When he had such a great season and became world champion. I think he's declined a little bit from then, but there's signs that actually over the last couple of months, his level is actually increasing again. So I don't think we should write him off. I still think he's got a couple more good years in him. Definitely the run to the Olympics. It's going to be difficult because there's so many really good men's singles players and there's so many really good young ones that are really hitting their peak over the next couple of years. And, like anyone that's from like your 20s to 24, 25, they're going to be absolutely nailing their peak. And so obviously Shiuchi's part that's going to be hard for him to kind of sustain that. And the same will go for players like Anders Antonsen, not Li Shifeng, sorry. No, I always forget how old those guys are, but definitely your players like your Anders Antonsen, obviously Cho Chen's a bit of a freak. Trying to think of some other players off the top of my head that are absolutely at the top of their game. Maybe Christo Popov, something like that. But, I don't think we should write him off. I'm always a little bit on the caution of someone who's so world class like Shiuchi to write him off. I think that's always a dangerous thing to do. And yes, you could say overall for the last 12 months, a decline from where he was once ago. But over the last, if you look at it like in a micro scale, I think he's slowly improving again. I'm actually really interested to see what we see of him at the Asian Games. I'm very, very interested in that. And as well as the final quarter/third of 2026. That would be, I think we need to kind of look at Shiuchi maybe next year. Maybe by this time next year. So within like, once we're hitting the Olympic qualification and we're getting like kind of to the business, we're getting to like a year out from the Olympics, next year's World Championships, I think then we can really kind of give this a better, we need more time. So last question, what player did you expect more out of? I expected more out of all the players that I picked who didn't do well. Obviously, I think obvious choices would be players like Christo Popov, losing first round. I know it was a tricky first round, but I felt with the way that he'd been playing, in Japan, just the way they've been playing throughout the year. He is now world number 3. Oh, that's crazy. I think he just didn't quite handle the pressure. I was expecting him to kind of be nervous, but I didn't expect it to affect him that much. I think I expected a little bit more out of Panitchaphon Tanaka. But then again, he played the eventual winner, Alex Lanier, who was on fire, but it wasn't a particularly close match. Anyone else? I guess you could say Alfian and Fikri I expected a bit more out of, but again, I kind of explained as to why possibly that happened. Indra and Joaquin. Yeah, I'm just going through all my picks that just crashed out really, really early. Trying to think. Anyone else? I don't know. And I think I'm going to end that video there because I've been speaking for so long. The last question, I'm going to give it to you. Who did you guys expect more out of? Who do you think had a World Championships that was massively under par from what you expected of them? And with that, as the light from only my screen in front of me is seeming to light my face, I think it's a great time for me to end this video. I've been speaking for long enough. Thank you for watching. And as always, guys, please do give me your thoughts on what I've said. Add more context if you think I've missed some or I need some. And like I said, right at the top of the video, if there's anything I've missed, I think I've spoken about quite a lot of players and pairs and matches, but there was so much going on, then please, obviously, go, Ben, why the hell didn't you talk about this player? What about this match? Oh, what did you do? I will do my best to get into the comments and kind of reply to you. And usually I'm like, and I love it when people give me long comments as well. I do read it all. I can't always reply in as much detail as I like. It all depends on how busy I am. But yeah, no, I love all that stuff. And like I said, I say this after every video, but I love the community and the kind of comments we get. Most of it's so constructive, so good. And I absolutely love it. But thank you again, everyone, for watching this. Another long video from yours truly. I don't know when I'm going to see you next, because I can't quite think off the top of my head. I haven't even looked. After watching, like, I'd say close to 100 matches this week, I want a little break from watching badminton, so I haven't even looked at what the next tournament is. I know it's the China Masters, but I don't even know what level that is. I'm kind of hoping it's a 500s, which I don't cover anymore. I do watch them, and I will kind of watch it, but I don't want to watch it with like a real analytical eye, because my brain needs a break. So maybe it'll be another breakdown. I've been flirting with the idea of doing more, not breakdowns, but when I'm not doing it, doing like a weekly Beckman's breakdown podcast thing where maybe I just talk about things that have gone on that week, or just literally just a weekly Q&A. That'd be pretty cool. Obviously, the breakdowns are when they are. I'm still trying to make these random bits of long form content. I'm still working on one that's been in the background for like 3 or 4 months now. Probably even half a year. I was quite close to finishing it. I'm really excited to drop that to you, but I'm also possibly looking at like those every week, just doing an episode of some sort of Q&A. You know, they don't have to be like 2.5 hours long like this. They could be half an hour, 45 minutes, like a podcast style. It's just me, but answering your questions and maybe just adding some things that kind of jumped out at me in the badminton world that week. Let me know if you think that's a good idea. But I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you when I see you. See you later, everyone. Bye-bye.